My mother-in-law threw herself backward onto the frozen cedar planks of our side terrace. Her sequin designer gown hit the fresh Vermont snow with a soft thud. She let out a piercing theatrical shriek that cut straight through the soft jazz playing inside the estate. Within seconds, my husband Nathan burst through the glass patio doors. He did not ask what happened. He did not look for any hazards on the ice. He looked at his mother, writhing on the ground, and then he turned to me with an expression of pure disgust. "She is dangerous," Patricia wailed, clutching her hip while scanning the growing crowd of onlookers. "Choose Nathan." My husband of 5 years did not hesitate. He pointed a rigid finger toward the driveway and told me to pack my bags. He ordered me off the property. He believed he held all the power. What he failed to realize was that the motion-activated smart camera I mounted above that exact doorway had captured every single frame of her fabricated performance. I was about to broadcast her lie to every elite investor in the building. Before I explain how I turned their winter gala into a federal crime scene, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to Emily Told Stories. I would love to know your age and which state you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Olivia Washington. I am 32 years old, and I work as a lead data security analyst for an agricultural tech firm. My daily routine involves dissecting complex code, finding hidden vulnerabilities, and securing fragile infrastructure. My husband, Nathan, operates in a vastly different reality. At 34, he is the vice president of his family boutique luxury real estate firm. He thrives on status, tailored Italian wool, and the endless approval of the Vermont's upper crust. Exactly 12 hours before Patricia decided to throw herself onto the icy terrace, the atmosphere inside the sprawling Green Mountain estate was already suffocating. The Winter Gala was the most pivotal event of their fiscal year. Caterers in crisp white aprons rushed past me balancing silver trays of poached pear and artisan cheeses. The air smelled of sharp pine needles and expensive catering fuel. I stood near the grand fireplace organizing the guest list on my tablet. Through the expansive bay windows, the dense maple forest looked breathtaking, blanketed in a thick layer of pristine snow. The scenery projected an image of flawless tranquility, shielding the intense panic vibrating through the house. Nathan paced the length of the Persian rug, clutching his phone to his ear. The collar of his custom dress shirt was visibly damp, a stark contrast to the freezing draft leaking through the vintage window frames. "I do not care what the state zoning board says," Nathan snapped into the receiver, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "These local environmental inspectors are looking for excuses to stall the Summit Ridge project. Find a way to bypass their soil assessment. We cannot afford another delay." He ended the call, his thumb jabbing hard against the screen. He rubbed his temples, his breathing shallow and rapid. Vermont is renowned for its fierce environmental consciousness. The state zoning laws are fiercely protected. For a developer like Nathan to complain about inspectors bleeding them dry meant he was cutting corners. It meant his prestigious real estate firm was operating in the shadows. I filed that information away in my mind. As a data analyst, I process human behavior the same way I process raw code. Nathan was exhibiting all the classic indicators of catastrophic stress. His firm was supposedly thriving, yet he looked like a man standing on the edge of a sheer cliff. Before I could ask him about the Summit project, Patricia glided into the room. At 62, my mother-in-law was the undisputed iron matriarch of the family. She wore a tailored crimson dress that demanded attention, her silver hair styled into an immovable helmet. She inspected the floral arrangements with a critical eye before turning her sharp, predatory gaze toward me. Patricia sighed, plucking a stray leaf from the centerpiece. "Are you genuinely wearing that dress tonight? It looks like something you picked up at a local farmer's market." I looked down at my dark green silk gown. It was simple, elegant, and perfectly appropriate. I did not respond. I suppose we cannot expect high society polish from someone raised in the dirt. Patricia continued, her tone dripping with quiet venom. Artisan farming is a cute little weekend hobby for the locals. But tonight, we are entertaining people who actually build the economy. Try to stay out of the way. We need these investors focused on our luxury developments, not distracted by your rustic sensibilities. She waited for a reaction. She wanted me to argue, to defend my heritage, or to shed a tear. Narcissists feed on emotional friction. It validates their presumed superiority. I offered her nothing. I kept my face entirely blank, letting the silence stretch until it became heavy and uncomfortable. I simply tapped a final entry on my tablet, turned my back on her, and walked toward the catering kitchen. My refusal to engage infuriated her. I could feel her glaring at the back of my neck. The tension radiating from both Nathan and Patricia was a crucial data point. Wealthy established families do not panic over routine environmental inspections, and secure matriarchs do not spend the morning of their most important gala hurling petty insults at a quiet daughter-in-law. Their arrogant posturing felt hollow, like a thin layer of ice covering a deep, rushing river of debt. I spent the rest of the afternoon observing them. I cataloged Nathan, avoiding the gaze of his primary investors as they arrived. I noted Patricia drinking 3 glasses of champagne before the sun even set, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the crystal flutes. They were terrified. They believed they were the elite predators of the Green Mountains, treating me like an insignificant burden they had to tolerate. They had no idea I was silently mapping every single fracture in their frozen foundation. I just needed the right moment to apply pressure. The gala officially commenced at 8 o'clock. The estate filled with local politicians, seasonal tourists from the city, and wealthy land developers. A string quartet played in the corner, attempting to mask the escalating friction. The grand ballroom grew suffocatingly warm as more guests arrived. The smell of roasted winter vegetables and rich red wine permeated the air. I watched Nathan laugh at a joke made by a prominent state senator. His laugh was a fraction of a second too late. His smile strained at the edges. He was performing. I kept to the perimeter of the room, sipping sparkling water, watching my husband network with frantic, hollow enthusiasm. Patricia intercepted me near the side terrace doors. The temperature outside had plunged, frosting the glass panes. She leaned in close, the smell of expensive perfume and alcohol overwhelming my senses. "You do not belong here," Patricia whispered, her eyes dark with genuine spite. "My son needs a partner who understands real power. You are just taking up space. I am going to make sure you leave this family tonight." She opened the heavy glass door and stepped out onto the freezing cedar planks. She looked back at me, her lips curling into a vicious, calculated smirk. Then she threw herself backward into the snow. The sharp crack of Patricia hitting the frozen cedar planks resonated like a gunshot through the crisp Vermont night. She had timed her descent with immaculate precision. Just seconds prior, I watched her gaze dart over my shoulder, locking onto the reflections in the sliding glass doors. 2 prominent venture capitalists men, who held the financial lifeline to Nathan's struggling luxury developments, were strolling directly toward the terrace, holding snifters of aged brandy. Once she confirmed her target audience was in position, she executed her masterpiece. Patricia writhed on the frost-covered wood, her crimson designer gown tangling around her legs. She let out a piercing, guttural shriek, a sound carefully calibrated to penetrate the thick, insulated glass of the ballroom windows. She clutched her right hip, her face contorting into a mask of pure, fabricated agony. The white plumes of her breath plumed into the frigid air as she began to sob. The soft jazz music inside the estate abruptly ceased. The low hum of elite conversation evaporated into a stunned, heavy silence. The heavy glass doors slid open with a sharp swoosh. Guests spilled out onto the freezing patio, their cashmere coats forgotten in the sudden rush of adrenaline. The two venture capitalists rushed forward, their expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the icy surface. Then came my husband. Nathan shoved his way through the gathering crowd, his tailored Italian wool suit standing out starkly against the pale snow. His chest heaved. He took one look at his mother sobbing on the ground, and a chilling transformation overtook his features. He did not kneel to assess her injuries. He did not ask the surrounding guests if anyone had witnessed the incident. He did not even look at the ground for patches of black ice. His eyes snapped directly to me, burning with a calculated, intense fury. "She shoved me," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking expertly. Her manicured fingers pointed a trembling, accusatory digit squarely at my chest. I told her we could not afford her exorbitant spending habits anymore, and she just snapped. She pushed me right over the edge. She is dangerous. Choose Nathan. You have to choose. The wealthy onlookers gasped, stepping backward, forming a tight, insulated semicircle around the scene. Their eyes darted between the weeping matriarch and the quiet, middle-class daughter-in-law standing near the railing. In their insular, privileged world, the narrative of the unhinged, greedy outsider attacking the beloved society hostess was too intoxicating to question. Nathan stepped within inches of my face. The scent of expensive bourbon and stale fear radiated from his pores. He looked down at me, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched beneath his skin. This was the moment a loyal partner would demand an explanation. This was the moment a rational human being would seek the truth. Instead, my husband delivered his rehearsed verdict. "Get off my property," Nathan hissed, his voice pitched low enough for the venture capitalist to hear his authoritative command. "Go upstairs, pack whatever cheap clothes you brought into this marriage, and get out of my house. You are entirely finished here, Olivia." I processed his words, dissecting the data points of his betrayal. His posture was rigid, projecting strength for the investors, but his pupils were heavily dilated. He was terrified of losing their capital, and offering me up as a sacrificial lamb to validate his mother's victimhood was his desperate strategy to maintain control of the room. I knew exactly how a terrified, broken woman was supposed to act in this scenario. I forced my breathing to become rapid and shallow. I allowed my shoulders to tremble, letting the freezing mountain wind aid my physical performance. I widened my eyes, staring at Nathan with manufactured disbelief and profound sorrow. I wrapped my arms around my own torso, shrinking backward against the frozen iron railing, projecting the exact image of a powerless, discarded wife. "No, Nathan, please," I stammered, ensuring my voice carried a pathetic, wavering pitch. "I never touched her. You have to believe me." "Save your breath," he snapped, gesturing sharply toward the open doorway. "Walk away before I call the local authorities and have you removed in handcuffs." I nodded frantically, my chin dipping toward my chest in total submission. I took a clumsy, uneven step toward the glass doors. As I moved, I reached into the deep pocket of my dark green silk gown, my fingers wrapped around the smooth glass chassis of my smartphone. I pulled the device out, my hands deliberately shaking. I fumbled with the smooth casing, acting as though I was desperately trying to unlock the screen to dial for help. Just as I passed the wrought iron patio table, I allowed the phone to slip from my grasp. The heavy device hit the metal grid of the table with a loud, distinct clatter, bouncing once before sliding near the edge. Nathan reacted with the speed of a striking snake. He lunged forward, snatching the smartphone off the table, before I could even feign an attempt to retrieve it. He gripped the device tightly in his fist, pulling it firmly against his chest. A cruel, triumphant smirk flickered across his face, replacing the manufactured outrage for just a fraction of a second. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my freezing cheek. "Who are you gonna call, Olivia?" he whispered, stripping away the public performance to reveal his true, vindictive core. "You have no one in this state. You have no resources. You are walking out into the snow with nothing. Get inside and pack." I let a single, silent tear track down my face. I looked at the phone in his hand, then looked up into his arrogant eyes, offering him a look of total, crushing defeat. I turned my back on the murmuring crowd and fled through the sliding glass doors, disappearing into the opulent warmth of the sprawling estate. Nathan remained on the terrace, turning his attention back to the venture capitalists, playing the role of the burdened, stoic son, protecting his fragile mother. He proudly slipped my smartphone into his tailored jacket pocket. He genuinely believed he had just isolated me. He assumed that by confiscating my phone, he had severed my only connection to the outside world, neutralizing my ability to fight back, gather evidence, or contact legal counsel. He thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess against an unarmed opponent. He was incredibly wrong. The smartphone resting in his pocket was a useless, hollow decoy. It was a secondary device I used solely for testing unsecure networks wiped clean of all personal data, contacts, and access codes. As I walked rapidly down the main corridor, moving past the lingering catering staff and the bewildered stragglers, I dropped the pathetic, trembling victim routine entirely. My spine straightened, my breathing leveled out to a cool, steady rhythm. The manufactured tears dried instantly on my cheeks. I raised my left wrist, pulling back the silk cuff of my gown. Strapped to my arm was a heavy, tungsten-cased smartwatch. It did not display fitness metrics or text messages. It was a customized military-grade terminal, hard-coded directly into the agricultural tech firm's secure servers, and more importantly, synced to the hidden surveillance network I had meticulously installed across this entire property. Nathan thought I was a dirt farming data nerd. He failed to comprehend that a senior security analyst does not rely on a commercial smartphone to control her environment. My watch contained the biometric override keys to the estate's entire digital infrastructure. I reached the entrance of the grand living room. The space was mostly empty, the guests having abandoned their drinks to witness the drama unfolding outside. Above the massive stone fireplace hung an 80-inch high-definition smart television, currently displaying a serene, looping screensaver of falling snow. I stopped in the center of the Persian rug. The trap was primed. Patricia had delivered the performance of a lifetime, and Nathan had eagerly provided the betrayal required to justify my response. They thought I was running upstairs to pack a suitcase in the dark. I tapped the face of my watch twice, bypassing the lock screen. The digital interface glowed with a crisp, lethal green light. I was about to show the elite predators of the Green Mountains exactly what happens when you attempt to hunt the architect of the security system. I stood in the center of the grand living room, the Persian rug muffling my footsteps. The space was mostly deserted, the guests having abandoned their drinks to witness the drama unfolding outside. Above the massive stone fireplace hung an 80-inch high-definition smart television, currently displaying a serene, looping screensaver of falling snow. The irony was not lost on me. I raised my left wrist, pulling back the silk cuff of my dark green gown. Strapped to my arm was a heavy, tungsten-cased smartwatch. It did not display fitness metrics or text messages. It was a customized, military-grade terminal, hard-coded directly into the agricultural tech firm's secure servers, and more importantly, synced to the hidden surveillance network I had meticulously installed across this entire property. Nathan thought I was a dirt farming data nerd. He failed to comprehend that a senior security analyst does not rely on a commercial smartphone to control her environment. My watch contained the biometric override keys to the estate's entire digital infrastructure. I tapped the face of my watch twice, bypassing the lock screen. The digital interface glowed with a crisp, lethal green light. I was about to show the elite predators of the Green Mountains exactly what happens when you attempt to hunt the architect of the security system. With a few swift swipes, I accessed the central hub. I bypassed Nathan's rudimentary administrator controls, a pathetic sequence of his birth year and his dog's name. It took less than 3 seconds to hijack the primary router. I selected the video feed from the discrete, wide-angle camera I had embedded in the custom cedar framing above the side terrace doors last month. Then I cast the live feed directly to the 80-inch display above the fireplace. The serene snow screensaver vanished, replaced instantly by the stark, high-resolution reality of the terrace. I adjusted the audio output, pushing the volume to the maximum setting on the integrated surround sound system. The crisp winter wind howled through the hidden speakers, flooding the grand living room. Outside, the performance was still ongoing. I could hear the muffled sounds of Patricia's fabricated sobbing bleeding through the glass panes. I walked to the edge of the room, positioning myself in the shadows near a towering potted fern, perfectly situated to observe the fallout. The sliding glass doors burst open again, this time from the outside. The guests were retreating from the biting cold, filtering back into the warmth of the estate. Nathan led the way, his arm wrapped protectively around his mother's shoulders. Patricia was leaning heavily against him, limping with theatrical exaggeration, her face buried in a silk handkerchief. The two prominent venture capitalists followed closely behind, their expressions a mixture of concern and uncomfortable obligation. The rest of the attendees crowded into the living room, a sea of cashmere and confusion. Nathan guided his mother toward a plush velvet armchair near the center of the room. He was playing the part of the devoted, outraged son to perfection. "Someone call a doctor!" Nathan barked, his voice projecting across the silent space. He settled Patricia into the chair, kneeling beside her with practiced concern. "She is in shock. That ungrateful woman could have killed her." The guests murmured in sympathetic agreement. Then, the audio from the television seized control of the room. The surround sound speakers crackled, broadcasting a sharp, distinct electronic beep. Every head in the room snapped toward the massive screen above the fireplace. The 80-inch display was no longer showing a live feed. I had seamlessly scrubbed back the footage exactly 4 minutes. The 4K resolution was unforgiving. It captured every detail of the side terrace in pristine clarity. The guests watched, mesmerized, as the digital version of Patricia stepped out onto the frozen cedar planks. The audio picked up the crunch of her designer heels against the frost. On the screen, Patricia stood alone. She did not look distressed. She looked incredibly focused. The real Patricia, sitting in the velvet armchair, lowered her silk handkerchief. Her eyes widened, tracking the massive display. The color began to rapidly drain from her face. Nathan stood up slowly, his jaw slackening. He stared at the screen, his brain struggling to process the impossible image. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against my confiscated smartphone, trying to reconcile the conflicting data. The video continued its relentless march toward the truth. The digital Patricia turned her head, scanning the interior of the ballroom through the glass doors. The microphone picked up her shallow, calculated breathing. She watched the two venture capitalists approaching. Then she moved. She did not slip. She did not stumble. The footage showed her deliberately bending her knees, carefully gripping the iron railing for support, and gently lowering herself backward onto the snow-dusted wood. She lay flat on her back, adjusting the folds of her crimson gown to ensure they draped perfectly across the ice. A collective, breathy gasp rippled through the living room. The sound of 60 elite guests simultaneously realizing they had been played. On the screen, Patricia took a deep breath, contorted her face into a mask of agony, and unleashed the piercing theatrical shriek that had halted the gala. The audio from the speakers echoed the scream with deafening clarity. In the living room, the silence that followed the recording was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, pregnant with the realization of profound deception. Patricia sat frozen in the velvet armchair. Her theatrical limp was forgotten. The silk handkerchief slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering to the Persian rug. She looked like a trapped animal, her predatory gaze replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The wealthy society matron who had spent decades cultivating an aura of untouchable grace was utterly exposed. The venture capitalists stared at her, their expressions hardening into masks of cold disgust. They were men who dealt in millions, men whose careers depended on assessing risk and identifying fraud. They had just watched the matriarch of the firm they were considering funding execute a pathetic, transparent con. Nathan was paralyzed. His tailored Italian suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. He looked from the television to his mother, and then his eyes frantically scanned the room, searching for a target, an excuse, a way out of the crushing humiliation. His gaze finally locked onto me, standing quietly in the shadows near the fern. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I offered him a look of cool, detached observation. The power dynamic had violently shifted, and we both knew it. He had tried to isolate me, to strip away my agency and cast me as the villain. Instead, he had handed me the platform to broadcast their inherent rot. "This is a manipulation," Nathan stammered, his voice weak, lacking the authoritative timbre he had wielded on the terrace. "The footage is altered. It is a deep fake. She is a data analyst. She fabricated this." His desperation was palpable, the frantic flailing of a drowning man attempting to grab onto water. The venture capitalists did not buy the lie. One of them, an older man with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze, set his brandy snifter down on a nearby end table with a definitive clack. "I think we have seen enough," Nathan the investor said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a finalized decision. "We will be in touch regarding the Summit Ridge project, but I would not expect a favorable outcome." He turned on his heel and walked toward the grand foyer, signaling for his coat. The second investor followed closely behind, casting a final look of revulsion at Patricia before exiting the room. The remaining guests took the cue. The exodus was swift and silent. No one offered their condolences to the matriarch. No one stopped to shake Nathan's hand. They simply wanted to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the public humiliation. The grand living room, once filled with the warmth of elite celebration, felt suddenly cavernous and bitterly cold. The pristine Vermont winter outside seemed to have seeped through the thick glass panes, chilling the air. Nathan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by empty champagne flutes and discarded hors d'oeuvres, watching his social standing evaporate. Patricia remained in the armchair, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on the blank screen above the fireplace. The video had finished playing, leaving only a dark, reflective surface that mirrored her total defeat. I stepped out of the shadows, the silk of my green gown rustling softly against the rug. I walked toward the center of the room, my posture straight, my expression unreadable. I had won the battle, exposing her lie and neutralizing his immediate threat. But as I passed the large bay windows, my analytical mind caught a detail I had missed during the initial broadcast. A secondary anomaly hidden in the background of the footage. I tapped my smartwatch, pulling up the video file again, freezing the frame just seconds before Patricia began her descent. I zoomed in on the top right corner of the screen, focusing on the shadows near the edge of the terrace. There, partially obscured by a decorative stone pillar, stood Alyssa, Nathan's younger sister. She was wearing a heavy designer coat, her face pale and drawn. She was not watching the gala. She was staring intently at her mother. And just before Patricia faked the fall, the matriarch reached into the bodice of her crimson gown, pulled out a thick, heavily sealed envelope, and swiftly handed it to Alyssa. The faked fall was not just about marital sabotage. It was a calculated distraction. The grand living room descended into a chaotic symphony of murmurs and rapid departures. Elite guests, typically obsessed with appearances, scrambled for their coats with uncharacteristic urgency. The illusion of the perfect winter gala was shattered, replaced by the suffocating reality of public scandal. Nathan stood frozen, his eyes darting between the fleeing investors and the damning stillness of the 80-inch screen. Patricia remained trapped in the velvet armchair, the physical manifestation of her own destroyed reputation. While their world crumbled, my focus remained locked on the digital display above the fireplace. As a data analyst, my brain is wired to identify anomalies. I am trained to look past the obvious disruption and search for the hidden variables that cause the system failure. The faked fall was the obvious disruption. It was loud, chaotic, and designed to draw every single eye toward the terrace. But what was happening in the shadows? I raised my left wrist, my fingers dancing across the interface of my tungsten-cased smartwatch. I ignored the panicked chatter swirling around me and tapped into the video playback controls. I dragged the scrub bar backward, reversing the footage frame by frame. The digital Patricia rose from the snow, gripping the iron railing in reverse, until she was standing upright on the frozen cedar planks. The timeline retreated further back to the moments just before the theatrical plunge. I slowed the playback speed to half, analyzing the peripheral details I had missed during the initial adrenaline-fueled broadcast. The camera angle was wide, capturing the expansive side terrace and a portion of the manicured hedge lining the walkway. The lighting was poor, obscured by the shadows of the estate and the falling snow, but the resolution was immaculate. At the very edge of the frame, partially hidden behind a decorative stone pillar, a figure moved. I paused the video. I tapped the screen of my smartwatch, zooming in on the top right corner of the television display. The image pixelated slightly before the software corrected the resolution, bringing the hidden figure into sharp focus. It was Alyssa. Nathan's younger sister was 29, an ambitious junior partner at the family real estate firm. She possessed all of Patricia's arrogance, but none of her matriarchal polish. Alyssa preferred the shadows, operating as the ruthless enforcer who executed the dirty work her brother and mother designed. In the frozen frame, Alyssa was not enjoying the gala. She was not mingling with politicians or sipping vintage champagne. She was wearing a heavy, dark designer coat, her collar pulled up against the freezing wind. Her face was pale, her expression tight with unmistakable anxiety. She was staring directly at Patricia, waiting for a signal. I tapped play, inching the footage forward. Patricia turned away from the sliding glass doors, ensuring the approaching venture capitalists were momentarily obscured by a structural column. The matriarch moved with sudden, practiced speed. She reached into the bodice of her crimson designer gown. I paused the video again, zooming in further. Patricia's hand emerged, holding a thick manila envelope. The package was heavily sealed, bulky enough to distort the fabric of her dress. She stepped toward the stone pillar. Alyssa mirrored her movement, stepping out of the shadows. I let the video roll. The exchange took less than 2 seconds. Patricia thrust the envelope into Alyssa's hands. The younger sister grabbed the package, her face a mask of pure terror, and shoved it deep into the interior pocket of her dark coat. Patricia immediately turned back toward the terrace railing, taking her position for the fabricated fall. Alyssa vanished back into the darkness of the walkway, retreating toward the rear entrance of the estate. I froze the frame on Alyssa's retreating figure. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The air in my lungs felt suddenly thin. The entire sequence replayed in my mind, shifting from a petty domestic dispute to a terrifying high-stakes conspiracy. The faked fall was not simply an impulsive act of malice born from my refusal to engage with Patricia's insults. It was not just a desperate attempt to isolate me and cement Nathan's dominance. It was a smokescreen. It was a highly calculated, chaotic distraction engineered to draw the attention of every single guest, every elite investor, and every potential witness toward the terrace. Patricia needed everyone looking at her writhing on the snow, so no one would see the covert physical handover of sensitive documents happening in the shadows. They were moving evidence, right in front of the town's elite. My mind raced, categorizing the new data points. Why physically hand off documents during a gala? Why not use encrypted digital transfers? Because digital transfers leave a footprint. Digital transfers can be audited, tracked, and subpoenaed. Physical documents, hidden in a heavy coat and slipped out the back door, vanish entirely. What was inside that envelope? Earlier that evening, Nathan had been pacing the Persian rug, screaming into his phone about Vermont environmental inspectors delaying the Summit Ridge project. He had demanded his team find a way to bypass their soil assessment. Wealthy, established families do not panic over routine environmental inspections. They panic when they are hiding structural rot. They panic when they are violating the law. The envelope was thick. It was heavily sealed. It was handed off with the frantic urgency of a criminal enterprise attempting to destroy the murder weapon before the authorities arrived. The conflict had just radically escalated. This was no longer a battle for my dignity within a toxic marriage. This was an active cover-up of a major financial liability. And I was the only person in the room who understood the actual game being played. I looked away from the frozen frame on the television and scanned the rapidly emptying living room. The venture capitalists were gone. The politicians had vanished. The remaining guests were practically running toward the grand foyer, desperate to escape the toxic atmosphere. Nathan was standing over Patricia, his tailored suit wrinkled, his face a mask of shock and fury. He was no longer the arrogant prince of the Green Mountains. He was a man whose carefully constructed illusion had just violently shattered. But he did not know the worst of it. He did not know that I possessed the footage of the handoff. I needed to secure the data. I needed to break into their internal networks and uncover exactly what they were trying to hide. I tapped the face of my smartwatch, terminating the cast to the television. The 80-inch screen went instantly black, plunging the room back into the quiet, dim lighting of the stone fireplace. Nathan snapped his head toward me, the sudden absence of the video jarring him back to reality. He took a step forward, his fists clenched, his breathing ragged. He was preparing to lash out, to use intimidation and volume to regain control of the narrative. I did not wait for his attack. I turned on my heel and walked rapidly down the main corridor, moving away from the living room and toward the rear of the estate. Olivia. Nathan roared, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceilings. You do not walk away from me. Get back here. I ignored him, my heart hammering a steady, rhythmic cadence against my ribs. I needed to access the primary servers. I needed a secure terminal, a place where I could unleash my expertise without interruption. I headed straight for the heavy oak doors of the patriarch's study, the fortress where the family guarded their most sensitive secrets. The sound of Nathan's heavy footsteps pounded against the hardwood floor behind me. He was giving chase, furious that his submissive wife was no longer following his script. I reached the study, grabbed the brass handle, and pushed the heavy doors open. The corridor leading away from the grand living room felt like a distinct boundary between two separate realities. Behind me, the chaotic remnants of the winter gala echoed against the vaulted ceilings. I could hear Nathan projecting his voice, utilizing his polished real estate pitch to perform desperate damage control. He told the lingering stragglers that the video was a technical malfunction, a mere glitch in the smart home framework caused by the freezing temperatures outside. He forced a charming laugh, clapping a wealthy local developer on the shoulder, insisting the catering staff refill their champagne flutes. He was weaving a narrative of technical incompetence, attempting to paint my meticulously captured evidence as a mere defect of modern living. It was a pathetic lie. Yet the Vermont elite often preferred a comfortable fiction over a messy truth. They craved a reason to stay and enjoy the vintage wine, eager to ignore the toxic underbelly of the family hosting them. I tuned out his frantic spin. My focus remained entirely on the heavy glass doors situated at the end of the hallway. The family study was designed to project undeniable authority. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass panels separated the room from the main corridor, creating an illusion of transparency while remaining thoroughly soundproof. It served as the nerve center of the estate. I pushed the brass handle slipped inside the dark room and engaged the heavy steel deadbolt. The lock slid into place with a satisfying, decisive click. I was sealed inside the fortress. Less than a minute later, Nathan appeared in the hallway. His tailored Italian suit was thoroughly rumpled, his tie hanging loose around his neck. His chest heaved, his silhouette ruined by the sheer desperation radiating from his bones. He marched up to the glass wall, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of adrenaline and fury. He slammed his open palm against the reinforced pane. The soundproof barrier reduced his intimidating assault to a dull, distant thud. He pointed a rigid finger at me, his mouth moving rapidly as he shouted through the barrier. The veins in his neck bulged, his perfect grooming undone by primal anger. I did not need to hear the audio to understand his script. He reached into his jacket pocket and held up my confiscated smartphone, pressing the dark screen against the glass. He tapped the device, mocking my supposed isolation. For years, Nathan had dismissed my profession. He told his country club friends that I provided basic tech support for local tractor companies. He never bothered to comprehend the actual scope of a lead data security analyst. His ignorance was his defining trait. His posture screamed dominance. He was mouthing threats promising to destroy my reputation in the tech sector, vowing to leverage his family network to ensure I never worked in data security again. He thought taking a piece of commercial hardware rendered me powerless. He truly believed I was trapped in a glass cage, terrified, and waiting for his inevitable punishment. I stood in the center of the study, maintaining a cool, steady breathing rhythm. I did not flinch or shrink away from his frantic display. I watched him, the way a scientist observes a volatile chemical reaction safely contained within a vacuum hood. His desperate flailing confirmed my hypothesis. He was a man accustomed to buying his way out of consequences, and for the first time in his privileged life, his currency was useless. I broke eye contact and walked toward the corner of the room. During the tedious hours of gala preparation earlier that afternoon, I had discreetly slipped my encrypted work laptop behind a row of leather-bound encyclopedias on the bottom bookshelf. I retrieved the sleek titanium device and carried it to the centerpiece of the room. The patriarch's desk was a sprawling antique mahogany structure, an imposing monolith that dominated the space. It smelled of aged wood polish and stale cigar smoke. I set my laptop on the pristine surface, but my eyes drifted down to the bottom right corner of the desk. There sat a deep, reinforced wooden drawer featuring an intricate brass lock. It was the only drawer in the entire estate that remained perpetually secured. Over the past 5 years, I had watched Patricia guard that specific piece of furniture with relentless paranoia. She never permitted the estate cleaning staff to dust that corner of the room. She kept the ornate brass key threaded onto a gold chain, wearing it around her neck like a sacred talisman. Whenever I entered the study to read, her eyes would instantly track my proximity to that specific corner of the desk. A society matron does not fiercely protect a standard office drawer unless it holds something catastrophic. In my profession, I know that highly sophisticated digital crimes always generate a physical tether. Arrogant people covet tangible proof of their exploits. They inherently distrust the cloud, fearing the invisible nature of the web. They need a cold storage vault for the documents they cannot risk exposing to an audit. That drawer was her vault, the hidden anchor to whatever she handed Alyssa on the terrace. I would deal with the physical vault momentarily. First, I needed to secure the digital perimeter. I sat in the high-backed leather executive chair. I flipped open the laptop screen, the keyboard illuminating the dark study with a crisp, pale blue glow. I reached under the mahogany desk, locating the dedicated Ethernet port wired directly into the estate primary servers. I bypassed the wireless network entirely, snapping the physical cable into my machine. A direct pipeline to their corporate soul. Outside the glass wall, Nathan stopped pounding. His frantic shouts ceased. He stared at the blue light reflecting off my face. He saw the titanium laptop. He saw the Ethernet cable connecting me to his family infrastructure. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, chilling dawn of comprehension. He finally realized my confiscated phone was a meaningless decoy. He understood that the quiet, submissive wife he had continually underestimated was now plugged directly into his central nervous system. My fingers hovered over the keys for a fraction of a second before descending in a rapid, relentless rhythm. I initiated the bridging protocol, tunneling through the superficial administrative firewalls. The security architecture of the boutique real estate firm was shockingly primitive, built by overpriced contractors who prioritized sleek user interfaces over actual structural integrity. It offered minimal resistance against a senior analyst. I sliced through their primary defense protocols in under 40 seconds. The system did not even register an intrusion alert. I was a ghost, moving through their corporate hallways, bypassing the biometric locks and executive privilege gates they mistakenly believed kept their secrets secure. Lines of code cascaded down my screen as I systematically dismantled their digital barriers. I watched the directory folders unfurl, laying there a decade of guarded financial ledgers, private client portfolios, and encrypted communication logs. I bypassed folders dedicated to trivial country club memberships and zeroed in on their hidden operational accounts. I was not just searching for the aftermath of tonight. I was mapping the entire anatomy of their impending ruin. Every keystroke pulled me deeper into the labyrinth, revealing a stunning lack of internal oversight. They operated with the reckless abandon of people who believed the rules simply did not apply to their bloodline. Beyond the glass, Nathan's demeanor shifted from shock to sheer, unadulterated panic. He dropped the useless smartphone onto the hallway floor. He grabbed the brass handle of the study door, shaking it with all his body weight. The steel deadbolt held firm. He shouted something to a passing staff member, waving his arms frantically, his face contorted in desperation. He was running out of time, and he knew it. He could not break the reinforced glass without drawing the remaining guests back to the hallway, but he possessed the blueprints to the house. I watched his eyes dart toward the ceiling, tracking the recessed lighting, realizing his next tactical maneuver. The central breaker panel was located in the sprawling basement. He was going to sever the power to the entire estate, plunging the mansion into freezing darkness, foolishly assuming a blackout would stop the extraction. Nathan's silhouette vanished from the other side of the reinforced glass. The heavy, frantic thud of his Italian leather shoes echoed down the long corridor, retreating toward the grand foyer before pivoting sharply toward the cellar door. He realized brute force could not shatter the structural integrity of the study, so he opted for a tactical siege. He intended to sever the central nervous system of the estate. The ambient, comforting hum of the commercial-grade HVAC unit groaned and abruptly ceased. A heartbeat later, the recessed overhead lighting extinguished in a synchronized, echoing snap. Total, suffocating darkness instantly consumed the sprawling Vermont manor. The sudden absence of electricity stripped away the polished veneer of the luxury home, leaving only the freezing, creeping chill of the mountain air seeping through the floorboards. Nathan believed that plunging the house into darkness would blind me. He assumed I relied on his infrastructure to function, that without his power grid, I would be reduced to a terrified woman cowering in the dark, waiting to beg for his mercy. His ignorance was a predictable, comforting constant. The study did not remain dark. It was immediately illuminated by the sharp, icy blue luminescence radiating from my titanium workstation. My screen cast a harsh, unyielding glow across the antique mahogany desk and reflected off the glass walls enclosing me. A senior data security analyst never operates without redundancies. My machine was equipped with a heavy-duty military-grade internal power supply rated for 12 uninterrupted hours of high-performance rendering. Taking away the wall outlets merely removed the background noise. I did not waste a single second waiting for the lights to return. My fingers danced across the illuminated keyboard in a practiced, rhythmic cadence. I executed a command sequence I had buried deep within their primary router 3 weeks prior. During a supposed routine software update for Patricia's personal tablet, I integrated a ghost protocol into the family localized intranet. It lay dormant since that afternoon, a digital Trojan horse waiting patiently in the shadows for this exact scenario. I hit the enter key. A sleek, minimalist progress bar materialized on my display. Heavy footsteps pounded back up the hallway stairs. Nathan returned to the study doors, his breathing ragged and loud in the pitch-black corridor. He slammed his fist against the reinforced pane, the dull thuds reverberating through the heavy timber framing. "It is over, Olivia!" he bellowed, his voice muffled but dripping with raw, unchecked panic. "You have nothing. The Wi-Fi is dead. The servers are down. You are going to sit in that freezing room until you hand over the laptop and sign whatever non-disclosure agreement my mother puts in front of you." The sheer scale of the dramatic irony was deeply, profoundly satisfying. He stood out there in the freezing dark, projecting a facade of total dominance, threatening to end my career and leave me destitute. He truly believed he had neutralized the threat. Meanwhile, the progress bar on my screen crept steadily past 30%. He shouted empty threats through the glass, entirely unaware that the digital vault containing his family legacy, their illicit contracts, and their darkest secrets was currently being siphoned directly into my encrypted hard drive. He was guarding a fortress that I was already actively looting from the inside. I ignored his posturing and pivoted my attention to their internal communication logs. Elite insulated families like Nathan's rarely trust commercial cellular networks for their highly sensitive dealings. They utilize a localized encrypted messaging server housed directly on the estate, assuming a closed-loop system guarantees their privacy. However, since my ghost protocol now controlled the primary router, I possessed the master skeleton key to their private conversations. I pulled up the live network traffic. Despite the power outage, their internal devices were still bouncing frantic data packets back and forth via cellular data, attempting to ping the downed server. I intercepted the handshake protocols and mirrored their devices to my screen. 3 distinct mobile numbers were active. I isolated the text exchange occurring in real time between my husband and his sister. Alyssa was messaging Nathan from somewhere deep inside the dark house, likely hiding in the rear conservatory. Her texts flashed onto my screen, the erratic spelling indicating her trembling hands. "We cannot keep this envelope," Alyssa typed, the little blue bubble popping onto my monitor. "The local police might show up because of Mom falling. If they ask questions, if they search the coats, we are finished. Let me burn the documents in the fireplace right now, Nathan replied, instantly, his keystrokes fueled by a dangerous cocktail of fear and greed. He was texting her while standing just inches away from the glass wall of the study, gripping his phone in the dark. "Do not touch those papers," Nathan commanded. "If you destroy the deeds, we lose the collateral. Just stay out of sight and keep your mouth shut. We need these signatures. Hold the envelope until the Maple Valley transfer clears on Monday morning. Do you understand me? Hold it." Maple Valley. The name hung on my glowing screen like a blinding beacon. It was a specific geographic designation, a crucial coordinate in the map of their deception. I needed to know why that particular transfer was worth staging a theatrical injury in front of the most powerful investors in the state. I minimized the interception window and cross-referenced the phrase Maple Valley with their central accounting ledgers. The downloaded files were fully compiled on my drive. The final firewall guarding their deep financial records was a rigid enterprise-level encryption lock. It was designed to keep out curious journalists and low-level auditors, not someone who spent their days securing national agricultural databases. I deployed an algorithmic bypass, slicing through their encryption within 40 seconds. The digital padlock dissolved. The private real estate ledgers cascaded across my display in endless rows of stark data. What I saw in those columns was breathtaking. The boutique luxury firm, the very foundation of Patricia's unyielding snobbery and Nathan's tailored arrogance, was not just experiencing a temporary liquidity crisis. It was a hollow, rotting carcass. I scanned the balance sheets, tracing the flow of capital over the past 36 months. The truth was catastrophic. They were hemorrhaging millions of dollars, suffocating under the crushing weight of defaulted commercial loans and frozen credit lines. Their prestigious resort developments, the ones Nathan boasted about at the country club, were mere illusions, propped up by hollow, manipulated numbers. Their operational accounts were drained. They were truly, fundamentally bankrupt. The wealthy investors drinking champagne in the living room earlier tonight were not there to celebrate a thriving business. They were the final, desperate targets of a sophisticated con. The Maple Valley transfer was not an expansion project. It was a desperate, illicit lifeline. They needed a vast, immediate injection of capital to save them from impending insolvency and federal scrutiny. They were willing to forge documents and fake emergencies just to keep the fragile house of cards standing for one more weekend. I stared at the specific addresses listed under the Maple Valley heading. I needed to see the physical proof. I needed to uncover exactly whose land they were stealing to save their own miserable skins. And I knew exactly where Patricia kept her tangible secrets hidden. I looked down at the locked mahogany drawer embedded in the desk. The glow of the laptop screen cast long, sharp shadows across the antique mahogany desk. Outside the soundproof glass walls of the study, the Vermont estate remained trapped in freezing darkness. Nathan had severed the main power, thinking the absence of electricity would blind me. He failed to realize my vision was currently flawless. The digital ledgers unspooling across my display painted a horrifying portrait of rural corporate fraud. I navigated through the deeply nested folders, peeling back the superficial layers of his family boutique luxury real estate firm. The legitimate residential sales were a mere front, a pristine facade erected to launder a much darker enterprise. The core of their operation was nestled within a labyrinth of shell companies registered in Delaware. These entities carried bland, bureaucratic names designed to deflect scrutiny, yet every single one traced back to the same parent holding group controlled by Patricia. I pulled up the primary operational spreadsheet, my eyes scanning the endless rows of meticulous financial data. The architecture of their theft was stunning in its ruthlessness. They were targeting generational artisan farms across the Green Mountains, but they were not engaging in standard real estate transactions. They were executing predatory seizures. Vermont is renowned for its stringent environmental protection laws, a rigorous zoning framework designed to preserve the pristine landscape and shield local agriculture from commercial overdevelopment. To a legitimate developer, these regulations are strict guidelines. To Patricia and Nathan, they were a weapon. I opened a subfolder labeled Compliance Waivers, discovering a cache of state environmental inspection reports. The documents bore the official seals of the local zoning authority, detailing severe ecological violations on specific rural properties. The reports cited groundwater contamination, illegal pesticide runoff, and soil erosion. I cross-referenced the signatures on the inspection reports with the internal communication logs I had intercepted moments prior. The truth crystallized instantly. The environmental assessments were forged. Nathan and Patricia were fabricating catastrophic ecological violations, leveraging their wealth to file fraudulent complaints against independent farmers. Once a farm was hit with these fabricated infractions, the state would levy staggering fines. The small artisan producers already operating on razor-thin profit margins could not afford the exorbitant legal fees required to fight the bogus charges. When the farmers inevitably defaulted, crushed under the weight of the engineered debt, the Delaware shell companies swooped in. They purchased the distressed foreclosed land for pennies on the dollar. It was a flawless, predatory loop. Drive the locals into bankruptcy using fake environmental violations, seize the scenic acreage, and flip the consolidated parcels to out-of-state commercial developers planning to build sprawling ski resorts and luxury mountain retreats. They were tearing the heart out of the local economy to line their own pockets. The heavily sealed envelope Patricia had shoved into Alyssa's designer coat on the freezing terrace suddenly made perfect sense. It contained the physical forged deeds for the latest round of acquisitions, the Maple Valley transfer. They needed those fraudulent documents physically signed and notarized by their corrupt contacts attending the winter gala. The faked fall was an orchestrated diversion to ensure no elite investor or curious local politician witnessed the illicit handoff. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, my heart maintaining a steady, calculated rhythm. I opened the master index for the Maple Valley transfer, pulling up the precise geographic coordinates and parcel identification numbers for the targeted properties. There were 4 farms listed in the pending acquisition queue. I read the first 3 addresses. I recognized the names attached to the deeds. They belonged to families I had known since childhood, neighbors who ran small dairy operations and organic apple orchards just a few miles from my hometown. Seeing their livelihood slated for destruction sparked a fierce, chilling anger inside my chest. Then my eyes drifted down to the final entry on the ledger. The 4th parcel was flagged as the crown jewel of the transfer. It carried the highest projected resale value, designated to become the primary access road for a planned luxury mountain resort. I stared at the rural route number. I scrutinized the acreage boundaries and the specific geographic markers. The breath stalled in my lungs. The steady hum of the laptop fan faded into the background. The cold draft seeping through the floorboards seemed to vanish, replaced by a searing, undeniable heat rising in my throat. The address listed on the final forged deed belonged to my family. It was the multi-generational maple farm where I grew up. The land my late father had spent his entire life cultivating. The sprawling forests of sugar maples and the vintage wooden processing barns were sitting squarely in the crosshairs of Patricia's predatory shell company. I leaned back in the high leather executive chair, the stark white rows of the spreadsheet reflecting in my eyes. A cascade of historical data points suddenly realigned in my mind, shifting from random memories to a clear, horrifying pattern. I met Nathan 5 years ago at a municipal land conservation seminar. He had presented himself as a wealthy developer looking to learn sustainable practices. He courted me with relentless charm, asking endless questions about my family farm, the topography of our land, and the specific trusts my father had established. He had spent years pretending to endure my rustic sensibilities, tolerating my presence at his elite country club dinners, all while Patricia hurled thinly veiled insults at my heritage. I thought they despised me because I lacked a trust fund and a high society pedigree. I thought my marriage was a constant battle for acceptance. The truth was infinitely darker. The betrayal was deeply intimate, a targeted surgical strike on my heritage. Nathan did not love me. He never loved me. Our entire 5-year marriage was a prolonged strategic setup. By marrying me, he gained proximity to my family estate planning documents. He secured intimate knowledge of our financial vulnerabilities, learning exactly which environmental regulations could be exploited to force a foreclosure. I was not a wife. I was a stepping stone, a localized asset acquired solely to facilitate the theft of my fatherland. The profound depth of their deception washed over me, but it did not leave me hollow. The calculated analytical facade I wore to navigate my professional life shattered, revealing a core of pure, unyielding rage. The quiet, submissive daughter-in-law they had continually underestimated was gone, incinerated by the blue light of the monitor. This was no longer a toxic domestic dispute. This was no longer a simple divorce proceeding where I would quietly pack my bags and walk out into the snow. This was an execution. I stared at the forged deeds on the screen. The digital trail was secure, but I knew the rules of prosecution. Digital files can be challenged in court by expensive defense attorneys claiming a network hack or fabricated data. To bury them forever, to ensure they spent the next 2 decades sitting in a federal penitentiary, I needed the physical hardware. I needed the localized encrypted cold storage drive that held the original, unedited environmental waivers and the direct routing numbers linking Patricia's private accounts to the Delaware shell companies. My gaze shifted away from the laptop, landing precisely on the bottom right corner of the antique mahogany desk. The heavy, reinforced wooden drawer with the intricate brass lock. The vault Patricia protected with her life. I stood up from the executive chair. The silence in the dark estate was abruptly broken by the sound of shattering glass echoing from the far end of the hallway. Nathan had returned, and he was no longer wasting time trying to pick the lock. He was breaking through the corridor window to reach the interior handle of the study. My window of opportunity was closing rapidly. I turned toward the locked mahogany drawer, stepping into the role they had forced upon me. The digital trail mapping the destruction of my family heritage pulsed across my laptop screen, stark white data against the dark study. Knowing they had targeted the artisan maple farm my father built was the catalyst that transformed this from a corporate takedown into a deeply personal execution. The Delaware shell companies and the forged environmental compliance reports were powerful evidence. However, defense attorneys possessed the resources to obscure digital footprints, blaming rogue employees or phantom hackers. To guarantee Nathan and Patricia spent decades in a federal penitentiary, I required the physical link, the irrefutable tether connecting their personal wealth to the stolen land. I needed their localized cold storage. My gaze snapped away from the glowing monitor, fixing on the bottom right corner of the antique mahogany desk. The heavy wooden drawer featuring the intricate brass lock. The vault Patricia fiercely guarded. I stood up the silence in the freezing Vermont estate, feeling heavier, pregnant with impending confrontation. From the far end of the corridor, the distinct, jarring sound of shattering glass echoed through the dark house. Nathan was no longer attempting to pick the deadbolt. He was breaking through the hallway window to access the interior handle of the study doors. My window of opportunity was compressing into mere seconds. I surveyed the patriarch desk. A massive, ornate brass bookend shaped like a soaring eagle anchored a row of leather-bound legal texts. I grabbed the heavy sculpture, testing its substantial weight in my palm. The cool metal felt solid and purposeful. I knelt beside the locked drawer, bypassing any finesse. I did not possess the luxury of time to decode the physical lock. I raised the heavy brass eagle and brought the solid base down hard against the ornate keyhole. The impact produced a sharp, deafening crack that ricocheted off the soundproof glass walls. The antique wood splintered, but the mechanism held. I swung again, channeling the profound betrayal and cold rage burning in my chest. The brass struck the lock housing with devastating force. The wood groaned and shattered, the intricate metal locking plate twisting violently inward. A third decisive blow ripped the mechanism entirely out of its housing. I dropped the heavy bookend onto the carpet and pulled the damaged drawer open. The scent of aged cedar and dust wafted into the cold air. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet lining, was exactly what I anticipated. A sleek, matte black, military-grade hardware ledger. It was a localized encryption drive, a secure digital vault utilized by individuals who routinely moved vast sums of illicit capital and required an offline repository for their routing numbers. This was the physical anchor, the undeniable proof linking Patricia's private foundations to the Delaware shell corporations actively foreclosing on my family land. I grabbed the cold storage drive, feeling the weight of their entire corporate existence resting in my hand. I scrambled back to the executive chair, slapping the drive down beside my laptop. I swiftly extracted the specialized adapter cable from my bag, connecting the encrypted ledger directly to my workstation. A secondary prompt immediately flashed on my screen, demanding a multi-tiered biometric and alphanumeric decryption key. The hardware was designed to instantly erase its contents if an unauthorized user inputted the incorrect sequence 5 consecutive times. I had one shot to extract the data before the drive cannibalized itself. Fortunately, Patricia's arrogance was matched only by her profound lack of technological sophistication. She believed a physical lock on a wooden drawer was the ultimate security measure. She failed to comprehend that true security requires complex, randomized access codes. I keyed in the sequence I had silently deduced over 5 years of forced family dinners and passive-aggressive holidays. The birth date of the firm original founder combined with the zip code of their most lucrative commercial property. The screen flashed a brilliant, approving green. Access granted. The cloning sequence initiated instantly. I watched the progress bar surge forward, transferring terabytes of offshore bank records, direct bribery ledgers, and the unredacted environmental compliance waivers Patricia used to destroy the local farmers. The data poured into my encrypted hard drive, creating an unassailable, permanent copy of their federal crimes. The progress bar hit 90%. The sudden, chaotic sound of splintering wood and crunching glass erupted directly behind me. The heavy study doors swung open with a violent, aggressive force, slamming against the interior wall. Nathan breached the room. His tailored Italian suit was ruined, covered in fine glass dust and dark smudges. His knuckles were bleeding where he had smashed through the corridor window to reach the interior deadbolt. His face was flushed a deep, terrifying crimson, contorted in a mask of manic, unrestrained desperation. The cool, polished real estate executive, who charmed politicians and investors just hours ago, was completely gone. The man standing in the doorway was a cornered, panicked animal. He saw the blue light illuminating my face. He saw the splintered remains of his mother-prized mahogany drawer. He saw the matte black hardware ledger connected to my laptop. The realization of what I had accomplished hit him with the physical force of a sledgehammer. He knew exactly what that drive contained. "Stop. Nathan roared, his voice cracking with pure, primal panic. He lunged across the large office, his heavy shoes thundering against the floorboards. He intended to physically separate me from the terminal, to use his substantial size and momentum to intimidate the quiet wife he had continually underestimated. He raised his hands, preparing to violently slam the laptop shut and rip the drive from the port. He expected me to scream. He expected me to cower, to raise my arms in defense, or to flee to the corner of the room. He anticipated the submissive reaction he had conditioned me to display. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still in the high-backed leather chair. I maintained unbroken predatory eye contact with the man charging toward me. My heart rate did not elevate. My breathing remained steady and calculated. At the exact second Nathan reached the edge of the desk, the progress bar on my monitor ticked to 100%. Transfer complete. With a smooth, practiced motion, I reached out and seamlessly ejected the hardware ledger from the adapter cable. I dropped the sleek black drive directly into the deep pocket of my trousers. Nathan slammed his hands down on the desk, stopping just inches from my face. He leaned over, towering above me, his breathing ragged and loud in the quiet room. He was trying to project overwhelming physical dominance. I looked up at him, my expression a mask of chilling, clinical detachment. I did not blink. I stared right through his frantic posturing, viewing him not as a husband, but as a compromised target. "You are too late, Nathan," I stated, my voice low, steady, and devoid of any human warmth. "I possess the routing numbers. I have the unredacted compliance waivers. I hold the undeniable proof that you are using Delaware shell companies to steal artisan farms, including my father, Maple Farm." The revelation struck him, halting his aggressive posturing. The color drained from his flushed face, replaced by a sickly, translucent pallor. He stared down at me, his mouth opening and closing as his brain struggled to process the sheer magnitude of the trap he had walked into. "You thought taking my phone isolated me." I continued leaning slightly forward, ensuring he felt the full weight of my words. "You thought a power outage would blind me. You failed to understand the basic parameters of the game you are playing. I am the architect of your digital infrastructure. You are just a tenant living inside the system I control." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at the shattered mahogany drawer and then back to the pocket where I had deposited the cold storage drive. The illusion of his power, the facade built on tailored suits and inherited wealth, was completely obliterated in the span of 30 seconds. He was staring down the barrel of decades in a federal penitentiary. "Give it back, Olivia," Nathan whispered, his voice trembling, stripped of all its former authority. He reached a hesitant, shaking hand toward my pocket. "Please, you do not understand what is at stake here. If that data gets out, the firm is dead. We lose everything." I did not move away from his reaching hand. I simply stared at his trembling fingers until he slowly, deliberately lowered his arm, terrified of crossing the invisible, unyielding boundary I had established. Before he could attempt another pathetic negotiation, the heavy footsteps of another arrival echoed down the dark hallway. Patricia pushed her way through the shattered doorway, stepping into the study. The matriarch had abandoned her fragile, weeping victim routine entirely. She realized the situation had escalated far beyond a simple domestic dispute. She assessed the shattered drawer, her son pale and shaking, and the cold, unbothered expression on my face. Patricia knew the vault was breached, and she decided it was time to pivot to a very different kind of transaction. Patricia shoved past her trembling son, stepping through the ruined threshold of the study. The heavy oak doors hung splintered and crooked, a jagged frame for the matriarch's entrance. Her entrance signaled a drastic shift in the atmosphere. The fabricated tears were gone, the theatrical limp discarded. She no longer played the victimized society hostess. She had reverted to the ruthless, calculating executive who had built and maintained the family's precarious empire. She assessed the room with a cold, predatory gaze. She noted the shattered mahogany drawer, the glowing laptop screen, and the matte black hardware ledger safely deposited in my pocket. She saw Nathan hyperventilating near the shattered glass, completely immobilized by his own incompetence. Patricia did not reprimand him. She understood that panic was a useless emotion in a crisis. She operated on the premise that every problem, no matter how catastrophic, possessed a specific, calculable price tag. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as she approached the desk. Patricia smoothed the front of her crimson designer gown, restoring her formidable posture. She reached into her sequined clutch and produced a slim, leather-bound checkbook. It was not a personal account. The embossed gold lettering across the top read, "The Green Mountain Heritage Foundation." It was a philanthropic entity she had established years ago, purportedly to fund local conservation efforts, but primarily utilized as a tax shelter and a vehicle for laundering their illicit gains. She withdrew a gold-plated fountain pen, the nib catching the sharp blue light from my monitor. She did not ask for the drive. She did not beg or threaten. She initiated a transaction. "You have proven your resourcefulness," Olivia Patricia stated, her voice smooth, measured, and entirely devoid of the venom she had spewed on the terrace. Her tone was the audible equivalent of velvet draped over steel. "I will admit we underestimated your technical acumen. However, resourcefulness without capital is merely a parlor trick. Let us dispense with the dramatic posturing and treat this as the business negotiation it truly is." She unscrewed the cap of the fountain pen and began to write. The scratching of the nib against the heavy, watermarked paper was the only sound in the freezing study. Nathan watched her from the periphery, his eyes wide, silently praying his mother's wealth could buy their salvation. "You are a data analyst," Patricia continued, not looking up from the checkbook. "A respectable profession, certainly, but hardly lucrative. You earn a modest salary driving a practical car, residing in a home funded entirely by my son's endeavors. You grew up watching your father struggle to maintain a failing agricultural business, constantly at the mercy of unpredictable weather and shifting market prices. You understand the suffocating reality of financial insecurity." She tore the check from the binding with a crisp, decisive snap. She placed it face up on the polished mahogany desk and slid it slowly across the surface, stopping it precisely halfway between us. $500,000, Patricia announced, her chin raised in a gesture of absolute aristocratic superiority. The numbers on the check were written with flawless, flowing calligraphy. "It is a substantial sum. More capital than you could hope to accumulate in 2 decades of analyzing spreadsheets for a rural tech firm." I looked at the piece of paper resting on the desk, then slowly raised my eyes to meet her gaze. I remained seated in the high-backed leather chair, my posture relaxed, my expression completely neutral. I did not reach for the check. In exchange for this unprecedented generosity, Patricia dictated outlining the terms of her desperate negotiation. "You will hand over that encrypted ledger immediately. You will permanently delete any duplicated files from your personal devices. Tomorrow morning, my attorneys will draft a comprehensive, ironclad non-disclosure agreement which you will sign without hesitation. You will then pack your bags and exit this property quietly, securing an uncontested divorce. You take the money, you keep your mouth shut, and you walk away a very wealthy woman." She leaned slightly forward, resting her manicured hands on the edge of the desk. She genuinely believed she was offering me a lifeline. In her insulated, privileged world, loyalty was a commodity, and silence could always be purchased if the bid was high enough. She assumed my silence on the terrace, my refusal to engage in her petty insults, was born of intimidation. She thought I was a frightened, poverty-stricken outsider who would eagerly accept a massive payout to escape the crushing pressure of her family's influence. Patricia offered a tight, condescending smile. It is a very simple equation, Olivia. A dirt farming data nerd cannot fight a multi-million-dollar real estate conglomerate in a court of law. We have the resources to bury you in endless litigation. We will freeze your assets, tarnish your professional reputation, and drag this out until you are destitute. Or you can make the intelligent, pragmatic choice. Take the $500,000, start a new life. Be smart. I kept my hands resting quietly in my lap. I did not speak. I simply stared at the check, analyzing the intricate details printed across the pristine paper. The routing numbers, the account identifiers, the specific typography utilized by the issuing financial institution. My silence unnerved her. The confident facade began to crack, a microscopic tremor disturbing her perfectly composed features. Narcissists rely on a predictable script. They expect gratitude, subservience, or at the very least, greedy hesitation. They do not comprehend absolute, unwavering stillness. Nathan stepped away from the shattered doorway, drawn toward the desk by the magnetic pull of the transaction. He looked at the check, then at me, his desperation morphing into a pathetic, pleading energy. "Take it, Olivia," Nathan unheard. Nathan urged, his voice trembling, stripped of his former bravado. "It is more than fair. We can both walk away clean. Nobody has to go to prison. Just take the money and leave. We will not pursue any retaliatory action. We just need the drive." I ignored him completely. My focus was entirely concentrated on Patricia. The trap was fully primed, the mechanism set in place, waiting for the final variable to align. I had anticipated they would attempt a buyout. It was the only tactical maneuver remaining in their limited playbook. But I needed her to physically produce the instrument of that transaction. I needed her to commit the act, creating an undeniable, tangible record of her intent. I leaned forward, my movement slow and deliberate. The blue light from the laptop screen illuminated the check resting on the mahogany surface. I did not touch the paper. I simply pointed a single finger at the bottom left corner of the document, resting just above the sequence of 9 digits printed in magnetic ink. The routing number. I finally spoke, my voice low, analytical, and terrifyingly calm. I recognized this specific sequence. Patricia frowned her confusion, masking a sudden spike of anxiety. She glanced down at the check, then back at me, unsure of the angle I was playing. "It is a standard corporate routing identifier," she stated defensively, her tone sharp. "The foundation accounts are managed by the largest commercial bank in the state. The funds are entirely liquid and immediately accessible. Do not attempt to overcomplicate a simple transaction." I smiled. It was not a smile of warmth or amusement. It was the cold, predatory expression of an apex predator who had just cornered its prey. "It is not a standard corporate account, Patricia." I corrected my words, slicing through the freezing air of the study. I cross-referenced this exact routing number while decrypting the files from your hidden hardware ledger. The funds you are offering me do not belong to the Green Mountain Heritage Foundation. They do not belong to your real estate firm. And they certainly do not belong to you. The matriarch stiffened, the color rapidly draining from her face. Her hand twitched toward the check, an instinctive, panicked urge to retrieve the evidence. But she froze, terrified of crossing the invisible boundary I had established. "That routing number," I continued, ensuring my enunciation was flawless, links directly to a restricted state agricultural grant fund. A massive federally subsidized account specifically allocated for the local university's environmental research and soil conservation program. The very program your shell companies have been systematically defrauding to fabricate those ecological violations against the artisan farmers. Nathan gasped, stumbling backward until he hit the glass wall. The magnitude of the revelation crashed over him, paralyzing his motor functions. "You are not offering me your personal wealth," I stated, leaning back in the executive chair, my gaze locking onto Patricia's terrified eyes. "You are attempting to bribe me, using stolen federal subsidy money. Money you illegally siphoned from a government grant intended to protect the very land you are currently foreclosing on." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and beautifully final. The power dynamic did not just shift, it completely inverted. By writing that check, I concluded, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper, "You did not buy my silence. You just handed me physical, irrefutable proof of federal wire fraud, systemic money laundering, and the direct embezzlement of government funds. You just signed your own federal prison sentence." Patricia stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the antique rug. The arrogant, untouchable society hostess vanished entirely, replaced by a broken, terrified woman, staring into the abyss of her own destruction. The trap had snapped completely shut, and she was caught perfectly in the teeth. The slip of paper rested on the mahogany desk, catching the cool blue illumination of my workstation. $500,000 written in flawless calligraphy. Seconds prior, that document represented Patricia's supreme confidence. She assumed her wealth could pave over any indiscretion, buying silence the same way she bought designer gowns and catered galas. Now, that rectangular piece of watermarked paper was a ticking explosive. Patricia stared at the 9-digit routing sequence printed along the bottom edge. Her breathing hitched a sharp intake of freezing air that caught in her throat. The imperious matriarch of the Green Mountains, a woman who had spent decades dictating the social hierarchy of the local elite, physically shrank. Her shoulders caved inward. The rigid posture that commanded boardrooms dissolved into the fearful flinching of a common thief caught red-handed. "You are lying," Patricia whispered, though the tremor in her vocal cords betrayed her denial. Her manicured fingers twitched, hovering inches above the desk, desperate to snatch the document back, yet paralyzed by the shifting authority in the room. "I am a senior data security analyst," I replied, keeping my tone level, glacial, and precise. "I do not deal in assumptions, Patricia. I deal in verifiable metrics. That specific 9-digit sequence belongs to the State Agricultural Grant Repository. It is a restricted treasury account intended to fund the university's soil conservation initiative. You routed those exact funds through your fake heritage foundation to furnish this bribe." Nathan stood near the shattered doorway, his ruined, tailored suit hanging off his frame. His eyes darted between his mother and the check. The realization of her fatal error hit him with the force of a speeding locomotive. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, translucent pallor. "Mom." Nathan choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. "Tell me you did not use the conservation ledger. Tell me you wrote that from your personal portfolio." Patricia could not answer him. Her silence was a deafening confession. "She could not use her personal portfolio, Nathan," I explained, pivoting my gaze to my husband. "Your entire operation is insolvent. Your luxury developments are bleeding cash. There is no personal wealth left to leverage. She had to tap the stolen federal subsidies because it is the only liquid capital your family still possesses." I reached forward and picked up the check. The crisp paper rustled in the quiet study. "By handing this to me," I continued, holding the document up to the light, "you transformed a digital suspicion into a tangible, physical confession. Digital rods can be contested in court. High-priced defense attorneys can argue network vulnerabilities, blame rogue contractors, or claim protocol spoofing. But a handwritten draft carrying your authorized signature, drawn directly from an embezzled government fund, that is irrefutable. You just provided the prosecution with the smoking gun. Patricia lunged. The instinct for self-preservation overrode her paralyzing terror. She threw herself across the mahogany desk, her crimson silk dress bunching around her waist, her hands clawing desperately for the slip of paper. She knocked over a crystal pen holder, sending it clattering onto the floorboards. I simply rolled my executive chair backward, gliding smoothly out of her reach. She sprawled across the polished wood, gasping for air, her perfectly styled silver hair falling into her eyes. The dignified society hostess was gone. She looked pathetic, grasping at empty space. "Give it back," Patricia hissed, her voice a ragged, breathless demand. She scrambled to right herself, her designer heels slipping against the antique rug. "You have no idea the forces you are dealing with, Olivia. We have judges on our payroll. We dine with the state senators. You are a nobody. They will crush you for stealing our data." Her threats were hollow, the desperate flailing of a drowning predator. "You do not dine with the federal authorities, Patricia," I countered, placing the check safely into the breast pocket of my blazer. "State judges cannot protect you from the Environmental Protection Agency and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The agencies investigating you do not attend your winter galas. They do not care about your country club status. They care about wire fraud, systemic racketeering, and the direct theft of taxpayer dollars." I let the weight of those charges settle over the freezing room. "The penalty for embezzlement of federal funds carries a mandatory minimum sentence," I recited, drawing upon the legal parameters I had researched during my initial audit. "When combined with aggravated wire fraud and the forgery of environmental compliance documents, the prosecution will seek consecutive terms. You are 62 years old. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in a federal penitentiary. Your estate will be seized. Your assets will be liquidated to pay restitution to the artisan farmers you bankrupted. Your legacy is officially dead." The reality of her impending incarceration finally pierced her thick armor of narcissism. Patricia let out a low, agonizing wail. Her legs buckled beneath her. She sank to the floor, her expensive gown pooling around her knees like spilled blood. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking back and forth. Nathan watched his mother collapse. The invincible matriarch who had dictated his every move, who had ordered him to throw his own wife out into the snow just an hour ago, was reduced to a sobbing, incoherent mess on the carpet. The psychological toll of their ruined empire was manifesting in real time. For years, they had utilized their wealth as a shield, believing it insulated them from the consequences of their predatory behavior. They targeted vulnerable rural communities, exploiting strict environmental laws to steal generational land, convinced their victims lacked the resources to fight back. They married me, assuming my middle-class backgrounds made me an easy, compliant target. They wanted a quiet daughter-in-law who would smile for the cameras and provide a wholesome, rustic aesthetic to their toxic brand. They never anticipated that the quiet girl from the maple farm possessed the precise technological expertise required to dismantle their entire holding company. "You destroyed us," Nathan whispered, his voice hollow, stripped of all its former arrogance. He staggered toward the desk, leaning his weight against the shattered drawer. "You planned this. You waited until the gala to ruin us." "I did not ruin you, Nathan," I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "Your insatiable greed ruined you. I merely compiled the math. You built a house of cards on a foundation of stolen land and forged signatures. The collapse was inevitable. I just provided the wind. He stared at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and filled with a terrifying, hollow desperation. The polished real estate executive who had charmed venture capitalists on the terrace was gone. He looked around the study, his gaze darting from the glowing laptop screen to his weeping mother on the floor. He was searching for an exit, a loophole, a magical reset button that could undo the last 60 minutes. There was no reset button. "Olivia, please," Nathan begged. He rounded the desk, his hands raised in a gesture of pure surrender. He dropped heavily to his knees, ignoring the shards of broken wood from the smashed drawer. He knelt directly in front of my chair, looking up at me with tears streaming down his face. "I will do whatever you want," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I will sign the divorce papers. You can take the house. You can take my remaining equity. I will give you the keys to the entire firm. Just hand over the drive and the check. We can tell the guests there was a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Just do not send those files to the authorities. I cannot go to prison. I will not survive in a cage." He was offering me the keys to a burning building. He still believed a negotiation was possible, failing to comprehend that the transaction phase had ended the moment Patricia handed me that forged bank draft. I looked down at the man I had called my husband for 5 years. I felt no lingering affection, no residual heartbreak. I only felt the cold, clinical satisfaction of a successfully executed audit. He reached out his trembling fingers, hovering inches from my knee, terrified to bridge the final gap. He was waiting for a lifeline. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the matte black hardware ledger. I held the sleek encrypted drive between my thumb and forefinger, letting the blue light from the monitor catch its metallic surface. Nathan's eyes locked onto the device. A spark of pathetic, desperate hope ignited in his expression. He thought I was considering his offer. He thought his groveling had worked. "You want to destroy this drive?" I asked softly, tilting my head. "Yes," Nathan sobbed, nodding frantically. "Yes, please. We crush it. We burn it in the fireplace. It ends tonight." I smiled a thin, merciless curve of my lips. Then I tightened my grip on the drive, preparing to reveal the final, inescapable layer of the trap I had set. The cold storage ledger in my hand was no longer the primary threat. It was merely a prop, and his groveling was about to become spectacularly irrelevant. The study felt like a tomb. Patricia remained sprawled across the antique rug, her crimson gown pooling around her like a severe wound. She stared blankly at the floorboards, the reality of her impending incarceration severing the strings of her carefully orchestrated life. The matriarch was thoroughly broken. Nathan looked from his mother to the forged bank draft resting in my breast pocket. The remaining color drained from his face. The polished luxury real estate executive dissolved into a shivering, desperate shell. He realized his wealth, his network, and his heritage were suddenly worthless currency. His knees buckled. He hit the floor hard, ignoring the sharp wooden splinters scattered around the ruined mahogany desk. He crawled toward my chair, his hands raised in a gesture of pathetic supplication. His tailored Italian suit, the armor he wore to intimidate local politicians and charm venture capitalists, was stained with sweat and dust. "Olivia, listen to me," Nathan pleaded. His voice cracked, stripping away any lingering trace of his engineered bravado. "We can destroy the drive. We can burn the check right here in the fireplace. No one else has to know. I can make this right." I remained perfectly still in the high-backed leather chair, observing his frantic unraveling. "I will give you whatever you want," Nathan sobbed, the tears flowing freely down his pale cheeks. "I will sign over the entire firm. I will give you the estate. Just crush that ledger. I cannot survive in a federal prison. I am not like her. I was just following her orders. She orchestrated the entire environmental fraud. She targeted your family. I will testify against her. I will tell the prosecutors everything they want to know. Just let me walk away." On the floor nearby, Patricia snapped her head up. Her eyes widened in sheer horror. The unbreakable family loyalty they constantly flaunted at country club dinners evaporated in an instant. Her golden son, the heir she had groomed to inherit her empire, was eagerly offering her to the authorities to save his own skin. I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. I searched my chest for a single ounce of pity, a lingering shred of the affection I once held for my husband. I found a cold, hollow void. My mind drifted away from the freezing study, pulling me backward to a vivid, sunlit memory. The air in my recollection smelled of wood smoke and sharp pine. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in the Green Mountains, a decade before I ever met Nathan. I was standing in the center of the sprawling maple grove my family had cultivated for generations. The leaves formed a brilliant canopy of fiery orange and deep gold. My father, Jacob, knelt beside the base of an ancient sugar maple. His hands were rough and heavily calloused, permanently stained with the dark, rich soil of our land. He carefully peeled back a section of damaged bark, exposing a network of invasive rot creeping into the healthy wood. "You have to watch the roots," Olivia, my father, had told me, his voice carrying the steady, unwavering strength of a man who understood the enduring value of hard work. Parasites do not announce their arrival. They quietly siphon the life out of the foundation until the entire tree is hollow. If you do not cut the rot out the moment you spot it, the disease spreads. You protect this land no matter what it takes. It is our legacy. It is who we are. The memory anchored me. It solidified the unyielding boundary between the honorable legacy my father built and the parasitic rot kneeling on my floor. My father spent his life nurturing the earth. The family groveling before me spent their lives exploiting it, stealing from honest artisans to fund their superficial luxury. I blinked, pulling myself back to the chilling reality of the soundproof study. Nathan was still staring up at me, his face streaked with tears, waiting for a pardon I would never grant. "You are a coward, Nathan," I stated, my voice dropping to a smooth, clinical whisper. "You built an entire identity on unearned privilege and stolen equity. You enjoyed the profits of the fraud. You relished the power it gave you over local farmers. And now, you lack the fortitude to face the consequences. You are offering to sell your own mother to avoid accountability. There is no honor in your survival." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He reached a trembling hand toward the pocket where I had stashed the black hardware ledger. "Please," he whimpered, his fingers hovering inches from my jacket. "Just give me the drive. We erase the data. We end this nightmare right now." I reached into my pocket and retrieved the sleek, matte black device. I held it up, letting the pale blue light from the monitor catch the metallic casing. Nathan let out a ragged breath, assuming his pathetic bargaining had succeeded. He leaned forward, eager to snatch his salvation from my grip. I did not hand it to him. I simply placed the ledger flat on the mahogany desk. "You are negotiating for a hollow piece of metal," I informed him, watching his desperate expression falter. "This drive is merely a localized backup. It is a physical redundancy. It is not the primary payload." His brow furrowed in severe confusion. His tear-streaked face twitched as he struggled to comprehend my words. I swiveled my laptop screen around so it directly faced him. The interface was bright and undeniable. A sleek, horizontal progress bar stretched across the center of the display. "While you were running down to the basement to sever the main breaker, I explained. Maintaining unbroken eye contact, you made a catastrophic tactical error. You assumed cutting the power would disable my network access. You failed to realize that severing the estate connectivity was the exact trigger I required. Nathan stared at the screen. The progress bar sat at 99%. I programmed a dead man switch into the ghost protocol 3 weeks ago. I continued, my tone sharp and unforgiving. The moment the primary router lost power, my terminal automatically initiated a secure, heavily encrypted data transfer via a localized cellular uplink. I did not need to press a single button. Your frantic attempt to plunge this house into darkness was the very action that sealed your fate. A soft, distinct chime echoed from the laptop speakers. The progress bar surged forward, filling the remaining empty space. The screen flashed a brilliant, undeniable green. Transfer complete. The words glowed on the monitor, a digital tombstone for their entire empire. Nathan stopped breathing. His hands dropped uselessly to his sides. The unredacted dossier is gone, I stated, delivering the final, crushing blow. Every forged environmental compliance waiver, every Delaware Shell Company routing number, the unedited ledgers detailing the systemic theft of the artisan farms, including my father's property. The physical evidence of your mother attempting to bribe me with stolen state agricultural subsidies. It has all been exported. Where Patricia croaked from the floor, her voice a hollow, terrified rasp. She crawled toward the desk, her eyes wide with impending doom. Where did you send it? I looked down at the ruined matriarch and her weeping son. The data packets were simultaneously delivered to the secure servers of the Vermont State Attorney General and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I answered, letting the magnitude of those institutions settle over the freezing room. The automated emails included a comprehensive index of your racketeering network and a mapped timeline of your wire fraud. You cannot intercept it. You cannot buy it back. The authorities possess the entire architecture of your deception. The room plunged into a suffocating, paralyzing silence. The reality of their inescapable destruction descended upon them, crushing the last lingering fragments of their arrogance. They were no longer elite real estate developers navigating a minor scandal. They were federal suspects caught in an airtight, irrefutable snare. There was no negotiation left to pursue. There were no bribes left to offer. The digital payload had reached its destination, and the bureaucratic machinery of the United States justice system was already grinding to life. The realization acted as an intense catalyst. The shared terror binding the mother and son dissolved, leaving only raw, desperate self-preservation. The polished veneer of their aristocratic family shattered, making way for the ugly, vicious instinct to survive the impending fallout. They were trapped together in the freezing study, waiting for the authorities, and the blame was about to tear them apart. The declaration of the exported data hung in the freezing air of the study, an invisible guillotine blade suspended by a thread. The absolute finality of my words acted as a potent chemical catalyst, instantly dissolving the fragile bonds of their aristocratic facade. For years, I had watched Patricia and Nathan operate as an impenetrable, unified front. They projected an image of fierce, unwavering family loyalty, wielding their shared wealth as a weapon to insulate themselves from consequence and intimidate outsiders. They demanded unquestioning allegiance and weaponized their shared surname to force compliance. That loyalty was a superficial luxury, easy to maintain when the stakes were low and the champagne was flowing. Faced with the crushing, inescapable reality of federal indictments and decades in a penitentiary, their precious family unity evaporated in less than 5 seconds. Patricia was still sprawled on the antique rug, staring blankly at the floorboards, attempting to process the sudden, catastrophic destruction of her legacy. Nathan, still kneeling by the desk, snapped his head toward his mother. The pathetic, tearful pleading vanished from his expression, replaced by a sudden, vicious surge of survival instinct. His eyes widened, wild and feral, locking onto the woman who had dictated his entire life. He scrambled backward, creating physical distance between them as if the proximity to the matriarch was suddenly toxic. "You did this!" Nathan shrieked, his voice raw and echoing off the soundproof glass. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Patricia's face. "You orchestrated the entire environmental fraud. You designed the shell companies. I just signed the paperwork you put in front of me. I am a subordinate. I am a victim of your manipulation." Patricia blinked, pulled from her catatonic shock by the sheer velocity of her son's betrayal. She looked at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. The golden boy she had groomed to inherit her empire was eagerly offering her throat to the federal prosecutors. "You spineless coward." Patricia hissed, her voice a raspy, venomous whisper. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, the crimson silk of her gown tearing against a splinter of the ruined mahogany drawer. "You were the vice president. You authorized the wire transfers to the Delaware accounts. You personally bribed the municipal zoning officials to expedite the foreclosures. Do not attempt to play the innocent pawn when you spent the stolen capital on Italian suits and luxury cars." I watched the venom exchange, maintaining my position in the executive chair. The blue light from the monitor illuminated their rapid, brutal descent into savagery. They were cornered rats, trapped in the dark, preparing to cannibalize each other to delay the inevitable. Nathan scrambled to his feet, ignoring the glass dust coating his trousers. He needed another target, a secondary scapegoat to dilute his own culpability. His frantic gaze swept the study and locked onto the shattered doorway. Alyssa stood just outside the threshold. Nathan's younger sister had retreated to the rear conservatory when the power was cut, but the escalating volume of the confrontation had drawn her back to the epicenter. She stood frozen in the dark hallway, clutching the heavy designer coat tightly around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, as she surveyed the wreckage of the patriarch's desk and the feral expressions of her family. Alyssa, Nathan bellowed, lunging toward the doorway. The junior partner flinched, taking a defensive step backward into the shadows. "Tell them!" Nathan demanded, his voice cracking with manic desperation. He pointed a rigid finger at his sister, his entire body trembling. "Tell the authorities you were the one managing the physical documentation. You orchestrated the physical handover." Alyssa shook her head, her breath hitching in her throat. She gripped the lapels of her coat, a defensive barrier against the sudden, violent accusation. "I did not do anything," Alyssa stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "I just held the envelope. Mom gave it to me on the terrace. I did not even look inside." "Do not lie to save yourself," Nathan roared, closing the distance and towering over his sister. "You forged the signatures on the environmental compliance waivers. You personally falsified the soil assessment data to trigger the defaults on the artisan farms. I have the internal emails proving you authorized the document forgery." Alyssa let out a sharp, piercing shriek. The betrayal struck her with physical force. Her own brother, the man who had promised to protect her within the family firm, was aggressively attempting to shift the burden of federal document forgery entirely onto her shoulders. "I only did what you both ordered me to do!" Alyssa screamed back, the pitch of her voice rising in sheer panic. "You said the Maple Valley transfer would save the firm. You said the foreclosures were guaranteed. You promised me a full partnership if I handled the paperwork." Patricia pushed herself off the rug, leaning heavily against the side of the mahogany desk. She glared at her daughter with unmasked contempt. "You were a junior partner executing administrative tasks." Alyssa, the matriarch, snapped, her tone dripping with cold, aristocratic disdain. You possessed direct access to the municipal zoning seals. The document falsification falls entirely under your purview. If the federal investigators ask, you acted independently to impress the executive board. The sheer audacity of the coordinated betrayal pushed Alyssa past the breaking point. The polished, ambitious junior partner disintegrated, replaced by a terrified, sobbing woman facing the obliteration of her future. I will not go to prison for your greed, Alyssa sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup. I will not let you sacrifice me to save yourselves. She reached deep into the interior pocket of her heavy designer coat. Her trembling fingers grasped the thick, sealed manila package. Alyssa yanked the envelope free and hurled it directly at Nathan's chest. The heavy package struck him with a dull thud, falling to the floorboards and sliding across the dust-covered wood. The seal broke upon impact, spilling the contents across the study floor. The crisp white pages of the forged land deeds scattered in the blue light of the monitor. The fabricated environmental inspection reports bearing the falsified municipal seals lay exposed. The physical instruments of their rural corporate fraud were now scattered like trash. Take your forged deeds! Alyssa shrieked, backing further into the dark corridor. Take your stolen farms! I am leaving! I am driving to the state police headquarters right now. I will hand them my laptop. I will give them the encryption keys to my personal email server. I will testify against both of you before you can pin this entirely on me. Alyssa turned and sprinted down the hallway, the sound of her heels echoing frantically toward the grand foyer. She was desperately attempting to win the race to the prosecutor's office, hoping to secure a plea deal by delivering her mother and brother to the authorities. Nathan stared at the scattered documents on the floor, the tangible proof of his sister's impending cooperation with the federal investigation. He let out a primal, guttural roar of frustration and lunged after her, charging into the dark corridor to intercept the junior partner before she could reach her vehicle. Patricia remained in the study, slumped against the ruined mahogany desk. She watched her children flee, tearing each other apart in a frantic, doomed race for survival. She did not attempt to stop them. She knew the effort was futile. The matriarch slowly turned her head, her gaze locking onto me. She looked exhausted, her posture defeated, the fire of her arrogance completely extinguished. I remained seated in the executive chair, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I had not spoken a single word since announcing the data transfer. I had not moved. I simply watched the inevitable implosion of their toxic empire, observing the meticulous destruction of the family that had sought to erase my heritage. They were devouring themselves, executing the final phase of the trap with a ruthless, predatory efficiency I could never have managed alone. The silence in the study was profound, a stark contrast to the violent screams echoing from the distant foyer. The quiet, however, was temporary. The automated data transfer was a silent alarm, and the response was already in motion. The trap had closed. The prey was secured, and the inescapable machinery of the justice system was rapidly approaching. The heavy footsteps fading down the corridor left a profound, suffocating stillness in their wake. Nathan had sprinted after his sister, propelled by the futile hope of intercepting her before she reached the state police headquarters. The distant slam of the rear conservatory exit echoed through the estate, indicating his desperate pursuit into the freezing Vermont night. He was chasing a ghost. The electronic transmission had already delivered the undeniable evidence to the federal authorities. Alyssa, rushing to confess, was merely a footnote to the insurmountable digital ledger I had just surrendered to the justice system. Inside the study, the atmosphere settled into a thick, chilling paralysis. The ambient temperature continued to drop, the winter draft seeping through the shattered corridor window and crawling across the floorboards. Without the central heating, The mansion was rapidly transforming into an icebox. Patricia remained slumped against the side of the ruined mahogany desk. The matriarch did not move. She did not attempt to smooth the torn silk of her crimson designer gown or fix the disheveled strands of her silver hair. Her eyes were fixed on an invisible point on the antique Persian rug. The formidable society hostess, the woman who had spent decades dictating the social hierarchy of the Green Mountains and orchestrating the theft of artisan farms, was undergoing a catastrophic psychological shutdown. I observed her from the high-backed executive chair. She was experiencing the terminal velocity of her own arrogance. For her entire adult life, wealth had functioned as an impenetrable shield. Her bank accounts, her Delaware shell entities, and her network of corrupt municipal zoning officials had provided a protective barrier against consequences. She genuinely believed her bloodline elevated her above the laws governing ordinary citizens. Tonight, that shield had shattered into a million jagged pieces. The unredacted compliance waivers and the forged land deeds were sitting in the inboxes of federal prosecutors. The state agricultural grant she attempted to use as a bribe was flagged for immediate audit. She possessed no leverage, no capital, and no allies. Even her own children had just abandoned her, eager to trade her freedom for a reduced sentence. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen of my workstation. The tactical execution was finished. It was time to initiate the withdrawal protocol. My fingers moved methodically across the illuminated keyboard. I closed the command terminal, shutting down the ghost protocol that had bypassed their internal router. I sealed the digital tunnel I had carved through their superficial firewalls, leaving no trace of my secondary access points. I did not want the incoming Cybercrimes Division to mistake my forensic audit for a random hacking event. I wanted the evidence package they received to speak for itself. A pristine, undeniably clear map of the family racketeering network. I reached out and grasped the sleek, matte black hardware ledger still resting on the desk. The cold storage drive felt heavy, dense with the compiled sins of the real estate empire. I secured the cap over the connection port and slipped the device into the padded interior pocket of my leather travel bag. It would serve as the physical cornerstone of the prosecution case, the undeniable anchor linking Patricia's private accounts to the stolen properties. I cleanly ejected my encrypted hard drive, storing it beside the ledger. I began wrapping the specialized adapter cables, winding them into tight, orderly coils. Every movement was precise and unhurried. The silence wrapping the room was a heavy, pregnant force, but it did not last long. It began as a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. High up in the Green Mountains, sound travels through the valleys in strange, deceptive patterns, often muffled by the dense forests of sugar maples and the heavy blankets of fresh snow. At first, it sounded like the sharp whistling of the wind cresting the ridgeline, but the pitch was too consistent, too unnatural. It rose and fell in a rhythmic, undulating wail. Patricia twitched. Her head tilted fractionally toward the reinforced glass windows facing the front driveway. The catatonic glaze covering her eyes fractured, replaced by a sudden sharp spike of primal dread. She recognized the sound. The distant siren grew louder, multiplying as it echoed off the frozen topography. It was not a single isolated tone. It was a chorus of mechanical screams, a synchronized wave of authority tearing up the winding mountain road. The federal machinery I had summoned 45 minutes ago was finally cresting the summit. The wailing intensified, transforming from a distant echo into a deafening, inescapable roar. The sheer volume vibrated against the glass panes of the study. Patricia pressed her hands flat against the floorboards, her breathing escalating into rapid, shallow gasps. She pushed herself up, her joints popping in the cold air, and staggered toward the window. She gripped the heavy velvet drapes, pulling them aside with trembling fingers. I remained seated, watching her confront the physical manifestation of her ruin. Through the frost-covered glass, the dark snow-swept landscape erupted in a blinding, chaotic explosion of color. Fierce, sweeping arcs of red and blue strobe lights pierced the darkness, reflecting violently off the pristine snowbanks and the thick trunks of the ancient pine trees lining the estate. An immense convoy of law enforcement vehicles surged up the long, winding brick driveway. Standard state police cruisers led the charge, their tires crunching heavily over the ice. Behind them rolled a fleet of unmarked, heavy-duty black SUVs bearing the subtle, terrifying insignias of federal task forces. The vehicles moved with predatory synchronization, forming an impenetrable, overlapping barricade that sealed off every possible exit from the property. The sirens abruptly cut off, replaced by the harsh, authoritative slamming of heavy vehicle doors and the sharp crunch of tactical boots hitting the frozen ground. Just as the perimeter was secured, outside the chaotic sound of stumbling footsteps echoed down the interior hallway. Nathan reappeared in the doorway of the study. He had not caught his sister. He lacked the stamina and the conviction to physically intercept Alyssa before she reached her car. He had likely watched her speed down the mountain only to turn around and see the tidal wave of red and blue lights ascending the hill to trap him. He was a destroyed man. His tailored Italian trousers were soaked with melted snow, his expensive dress shoes caked in freezing mud. His chest heaved with exhausting, defeated sobs. He stumbled into the room, his eyes vacant and bloodshot. He looked at the flashing strobe lights, strobing through the windows, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the antique furniture. He looked at his mother, who was now gripping the velvet drapes like a lifeline, her face illuminated by the relentless red and blue flashes. Nathan did not shout. He did not offer any more pathetic bargains or hurl useless threats. The final ounce of fight had been bled out of him. He staggered forward, his knees giving out entirely. He collapsed against the side of the mahogany desk, sliding down until he hit the floorboards. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around his head, and began to sob with deep, guttural, unrestrained agony. Patricia released the drapes. She turned away from the window, her expression entirely slack. The fierce matriarch was gone. Her mind simply snapped, unable to reconcile her aristocratic self-image with the brutal reality of an impending federal arrest. She shuffled toward the plush leather armchair in the corner of the room and collapsed into it. She stared straight ahead, her eyes empty, entirely unresponsive to her son weeping on the floor, or the shouting voices of the tactical units organizing on her front lawn. She had entered a state of profound catatonic shock. I surveyed the wreckage of the family. The room was a portrait of total devastation, bathed in the frantic, pulsing light of the police cruisers. I reached forward and closed the lid of my titanium laptop. The screen went dark, severing the final digital tether. I unhooked the Ethernet cable, letting it drop to the floor. I slid the machine into my leather bag and secured the heavy brass buckles. I stood up from the executive chair, my posture immaculate, my breathing steady. I adjusted the lapels of my blazer, feeling the crisp, satisfying weight of the cold storage drive resting in my interior pocket. I did not need to raise my voice or lift a finger to secure my freedom. I simply executed the audit, maintained an unbreakable boundary, and let the crushing weight of the justice system arrive at their doorstep. The heavy, authoritative pounding of armored fists striking the estate front doors shattered the remaining tension in the house. A booming, electronically amplified voice ordered the occupants to surrender. The final breach was imminent. The authoritative pounding on the heavy oak double doors echoed through the dark hallway, shaking the antique frames mounted against the floral wallpaper. Before anyone inside the freezing manor could muster a response, the reinforced brass hinges gave way with a deafening, splintering crack. The custom woodwork caved inward, yielding to the overwhelming force of the federal raid. The frigid Vermont wind rushed into the grand foyer, carrying a swarm of heavily armed personnel. Tactical flashlights sliced through the pitch-black interior, casting erratic, jagged shadows across the imported marble floors. State troopers in winter gear moved with synchronized, uncompromising efficiency, securing the perimeter in mere seconds. The raid did not commence in the study. The vanguard of the task force hauled a thrashing figure through the ruined front entrance. It was Alyssa. She had sprinted toward her vehicle, hoping to beat the blockade, only to encounter an impenetrable wall of federal cruisers at the bottom of the long, winding driveway. 2 state troopers marched her down the central corridor. Her dark designer coat, once a symbol of her junior partner status, was stained with freezing mud and slush. Her expensive leather boots were missing, abandoned in the snowdrifts during her futile escape attempt. She shrieked, demanding to speak to a prosecutor, sobbing that she possessed insider evidence to trade. The troopers ignored her frantic bargaining, pressing her face first against the frosted glass wall, separating the hallway from the patriarch's office. The lead investigator, a tall woman wearing a dark windbreaker bearing the FBI insignia, stepped through the shattered doorway of the study. Her flashlight beam swept over the wreckage. The harsh white light illuminated the smashed mahogany drawer, the scattered forged deeds on the floorboards, and finally settled on Nathan. He shrank away from the piercing beam, raising his trembling hands to shield his eyes. His tailored Italian suit, once the ultimate symbol of his unearned authority, was now a crumpled, dusty rag. He whimpered, pressing his spine against the unyielding wood of the desk leg. Nathaniel and Patricia, the lead agent, announced her tone sharp, clinical, and devoid of any human sympathy. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, systemic racketeering, and the embezzlement of state agricultural funds. Officers swarmed the room. They hauled Nathan to his feet. He offered zero resistance, his limbs limp and uncooperative. The sharp, metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoing in the dark room provided a highly satisfying conclusion to his reign of intimidation. Across the room, 2 officers approached the plush leather armchair. Patricia stared straight through them. She did not fight when they grabbed her wrists. She moved like a hollow porcelain doll, stripped of the imperious fire that had fueled her for decades. The matriarch who had dedicated her life to controlling the social hierarchy of the Green Mountains was now just another suspect in a coordinated federal sweep. The agent recited their Miranda rights. The procedural words bounced off the soundproof glass walls. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The phrasing was deeply poetic. For years, Patricia had wielded silence and exclusion as weapons against anyone she deemed inferior. Now the United States government was legally imposing silence upon her. Before exiting the ruined office, the lead investigator turned toward me. She lowered her flashlight, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dim blue glow of the emergency lights filtering in from the hallway. Are you the individual who initiated the secure uplink to the Attorney General? The agent asked, her tone shifting from hostile command to measured inquiry. I nodded slowly. I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer. I withdrew the sleek, matte black hardware ledger. The cold storage drive felt dense in my palm, a heavy brick containing a decade of stolen land and falsified environmental reports. The digital transfer contains the roadmap I stated, placing the ledger directly into the agent's gloved hand. This drive is the physical anchor. It holds the original compliance waivers and the direct routing numbers tying her private foundation to the Delaware holding companies. The investigator inspected the device, securing it inside a static proof evidence bag. Your data packet was immaculate. It provided the exact probable cause required to mobilize this task force before the suspects could destroy the paper trail. She gave me a brief, respectful nod. the silent acknowledgement of one professional recognizing the precise execution of another. The authorities marched the family out of the study. I remained standing near the corner, my leather laptop bag resting securely against my shoulder. None of the arrested individuals looked at me. Their shame was too profound, their defeat too thorough. I followed them at a measured pace. The hallway was a scene of calculated chaos. Evidence collection teams were already photographing the scattered forged deeds Alyssa had thrown in her panic, bagging the documents that would guarantee her conviction. The troopers pushed the 3 prisoners out onto the front porch. The blizzard had intensified, swirling thick white flakes into the blinding red and blue strobe lights of the cruiser convoy. The icy wind bit into their exposed skin. A crowd had gathered near the wrought iron perimeter gates. The remaining gala attendees, local politicians who had fled the initial altercation, and the wealthy neighbors of the private cul-de-sac stood bundled in their cashmere coats. They held their glowing smartphones up, recording the spectacular downfall of the neighborhood's most prestigious family. Patricia was guided down the stone steps. The flashing camera lenses captured her disheveled silver hair and her torn crimson gown. She was no longer a revered hostess, setting the standard for elite society. She was a spectacle. A cautionary tale for the Vermont upper crust. Nathan stumbled on the ice, his chin dropping to his chest to hide his tear-streaked face from the local developers he had tried to impress just hours ago. Alyssa sobbed openly, her desperate pleas for a plea deal drowned out by the howling wind and the idling engines of the police SUVs. The catering staff, huddled near their utility vans, watched in silent shock. They had spent the evening serving poached pears and vintage champagne to these specific people. Now they watched those same elites hauled away in chains. The contrast between the opulent winter gala and the brutal federal raid was sharp and unforgiving. I stood on the top step of the porch, wrapping my tailored wool coat tightly against the chill. The frigid air filled my lungs. The oppressive, toxic weight that had hung over this property for the 5 years of my marriage was gone. The dark pine forests surrounding the estate seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The stolen artisan farms would be returned to their rightful owners. The local soil would no longer be threatened by predatory luxury developments. The cruiser doors slammed shut in unison. The heavy engines revved, tires gripping the salted asphalt. One by one, the convoy of law enforcement vehicles began their descent down the winding mountain road. I watched the glowing red taillights fade into the swirling blizzard. I did not raise my voice in triumph. I did not shed a single tear of relief. I had utilized unbreakable boundaries and undeniable metrics to dismantle a monster. I pulled my laptop bag higher on my shoulder, inhaling the crisp, clean winter air. The battle was won, and the silence that followed belonged entirely to me. The piercing red and blue strobes faded into the swirling blizzard, leaving the estate driveway bathed in the cold, silent white of the heavy snowfall. The authoritative thud of tactical boots and the chaotic shouting of the federal raid evaporated, replaced by the hushed whispering of the few remaining neighbors retreating to their respective mansions. The air was crisp, sharp, and finally clean. I stood alone on the snow-covered porch, the heavy oak doors splintered and ruined behind me. I pulled the collar of my tailored wool coat tighter, securing my leather laptop bag against my shoulder. I did not linger. I turned my back on the sprawling Vermont estate, walking down the long, winding driveway without a single glance over my shoulder. The fortress they built to intimidate the world was now just a massive piece of state evidence. The subsequent 6 months unfolded with the precise mechanical efficiency I had anticipated. The federal prosecutors did not need to construct a complex narrative. I had provided them with an airtight, unassailable blueprint. The unredacted compliance waivers, the routed bank transfers, and the physical hardware ledger formed an impenetrable wall of evidence. Faced with decades in a federal penitentiary, the fragile family dynamic shattered entirely during the discovery phase. Nathan eagerly attempted to negotiate a plea deal by confirming every detail of Patricia's environmental fraud, desperately trying to paint himself as an oblivious subordinate. Patricia retaliated by submitting internal communications that proved Nathan had personally authorized the bribery of local zoning officials. Alyssa, terrified of the consequences, surrendered her personal devices, confirming she had physically forged the signatures on the artisan farm deeds under her mother's direct supervision. They cannibalized each other in open court, executing the final phase of their own destruction. The sentences were handed down in a packed federal courthouse in late spring. Nathan, stripped of his tailored suits and his unearned arrogance, was sentenced to 15 consecutive years in a maximum security facility for wire fraud and systemic racketeering. His desperate pleas for leniency were ignored by a judge who viewed his predatory actions with absolute disgust. The polished real estate executive who had charmed venture capitalists and slapped his wife on a freezing terrace was reduced to a weeping, broken man in a standard-issue prison uniform. Patricia received a 20-year sentence, reflecting her role as the primary architect of the embezzlement and environmental fraud. The proud society matriarch, the woman who had spent decades dictating the social hierarchy of the Green Mountains, was stripped of her wealth, her status, and her freedom. The judge, noting her particular disdain for the rural farming community she exploited, mandated her placement in a federal facility that required inmates to perform manual agricultural labor. The poetic justice was profound. The woman who had relentlessly mocked my artisan farming roots, who had sneered at the dirt farming data nerd, would spend the next 2 decades harvesting crops under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Alyssa, due to her extensive cooperation and lack of previous criminal history, avoided a lengthy prison term, but the financial penalties were catastrophic. She was ordered to pay millions in federal restitution, completely liquidating her personal assets and guaranteeing a lifetime of inescapable debt. Her junior partnership at the firm was revoked, her professional reputation permanently annihilated. The boutique luxury real estate firm was officially dissolved, placed into federal receivership by the state attorney general. The government aggressively seized all corporate and personal assets to compensate the defrauded investors and the artisan farmers whose land had been illegally foreclosed upon. The sprawling Vermont estate, the crown jewel of Patricia's empire, was listed for public auction. It was mid-October when the crisp mountain air heralded the arrival of autumn. The dense maple forests surrounding the Green Mountains burst into vibrant shades of fiery orange, deep red, and rich gold. I parked my practical SUV at the end of a long, familiar dirt road. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel. I was not wearing a dark silk gown or standing in the shadows of a toxic marriage. I wore comfortable denim and a thick flannel shirt, inhaling the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. I walked up the slight incline toward the sprawling, multi-generational maple farm my father had built. The vintage wooden processing barns stood tall and proud against the vibrant autumn canopy. The land was safe. Working alongside the State Agricultural Board and utilizing the comprehensive data I had extracted during the raid, I ensured the forged environmental compliance waivers were officially expunged. The state returned the foreclosed properties to their rightful owners, completely unwinding the predatory seizures Patricia and Nathan had orchestrated. My family's farm, along with the 3 neighboring artisan operations, were permanently secured. I reached the front porch of the farmhouse and unlocked the heavy wooden door. The interior was quiet, smelling of aged timber and sweet maple. It was a space built on honest labor and enduring legacy, a stark contrast to the sterile, freezing mansion I had escaped. I walked into the home office, a room filled with sunlight and the rustic charm of rural Vermont. I set my leather bag on the sturdy oak desk and retrieved my titanium laptop. I was no longer a silent, submissive daughter-in-law enduring endless psychological warfare. I had leveraged the payout from the Federal Whistleblower Reward Program, combined with the modest savings I had meticulously hidden prior to the gala, to establish my own independent data consultancy firm. I specialized in auditing agricultural supply chains and securing rural environmental databases against predatory corporate intrusion. I was using my expertise to protect the very foundation my father had taught me to value. My business was thriving. The demand for rigorous, unassailable data security in the agricultural sector was immense, and my reputation for absolute precision preceded me. I was the architect of my own empire, built on undeniable metrics and unbreakable boundaries. Later that afternoon, I drove back down the mountain, heading toward the heart of the local valley. The autumn sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the vibrant landscape. I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the sprawling estate I had once called home. The property looked vastly different now. The manicured hedges were slightly overgrown, the pristine snow replaced by fallen autumn leaves. The imposing structure had lost its intimidating aura, reduced to a hollow shell, waiting for a new purpose. I did not stop at the gate. I tapped a remote control on my dashboard, and the heavy iron barriers swung open smoothly. I drove up the long brick driveway and parked near the front steps. I stepped out of the vehicle, the crisp wind whipping my hair across my face. I walked up to the heavy oak front doors, the exact doors Nathan and Patricia had been dragged through by federal agents 6 months prior. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. Because the real estate firm had entered federal receivership, the government was desperate to liquidate the seized assets quickly to satisfy the massive restitution demands. The estate had been placed on the auction block severely undervalued due to the highly publicized criminal scandal attached to the property. Elite buyers avoided the mansion, fearing the radioactive stigma of the family's downfall. I had placed a solitary, aggressive bid through a blind trust. I acquired the sprawling estate for pennies on the dollar, utilizing the very capital they had assumed I lacked. I inserted the key into the newly installed deadbolt and turned it. The mechanism clicked solidly. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the grand foyer. The marble floors echoed with the familiar sound of my footsteps, but the oppressive, toxic atmosphere was completely eradicated. The house was empty, stripped of the antique mahogany desks, the velvet armchairs, and the crystal champagne flutes. It was a blank canvas. I walked past the shattered corridor window and entered the soundproof glass study. The space where I had systematically dismantled their empire was now bathed in warm, golden sunlight. I stood in the center of the room, remembering the sheer panic on Nathan's face and the devastating silence that followed Patricia's fatal mistake. I had not won by matching their volume or stooping to their physical violence. I had won by mastering the silence, by turning my pain into a highly calibrated tracking mechanism, and by letting their own insatiable greed pull the trigger on the trap. I looked out the expansive bay windows, the spectacular view of the Green Mountains sprawling before me. The estate was no longer a monument to unearned privilege and stolen equity. I planned to renovate the massive structure, transforming the sterile mansion into a regional headquarters for my data consultancy and a dedicated training facility for local farmers seeking to secure their digital infrastructure. I would repurpose the architecture of their arrogance into a fortress of protection for the community they had attempted to destroy. The battle was over. The execution was flawless. I was Olivia Washington, a lead data security analyst, a survivor of an abusive marriage, and the undisputed owner of the ground beneath my feet. I stood in the sunlight, breathing in the quiet, absolute victory of a woman who had silenced the monsters and reclaimed her peace. It was 5 p.m. on a Tuesday when the call came. I was standing in my kitchen, a dish towel thrown over my shoulder, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. "Mrs. Washington," the voice on the other end was tight, professional. "This is Principal Davis from Oak Ridge High. There's been an incident." Those 3 words. There's been an incident. They carry a specific weight, don't they? A sudden, chilling gravity that settles right at the base of your throat. My son Leo was a junior. He was a quiet kid mostly. He played soccer, got decent grades, and spent too much time on his phone. He wasn't the kind of kid you got a call about. But that Tuesday, he was. The drive to the school was a blur of frantic thoughts and white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. When I arrived, the principal's office smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. Leo was sitting in a hard plastic chair, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed firmly on the scuffed linoleum floor. He wouldn't look at me. Leo, Principal Davis began adjusting his glasses, was caught cheating on his AP history final. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Cheating. The accusation felt foreign, a word that belonged in someone else's life, not mine. I looked at Leo, waiting for the denial, the explanation, the misunderstanding. But he just shrank deeper into his chair. He had the answers written on the inside of his water bottle label, the principal continued. "It's a serious offense, Mrs. Washington. It goes against everything we stand for here at Oak Ridge." I remember the profound sense of disappointment that washed over me, not just in Leo, but in myself. Where had I gone wrong? Had I pushed him too hard? Had I not pushed him enough? The questions swirled in my mind, a chaotic storm of self-doubt and maternal guilt. In American culture, we often equate success with achievement. We celebrate the A's on report cards, the winning goals, the college acceptances. We build our parenting identities around these tangible markers of success. We want our children to excel, to reach the top, to secure their futures. But what happens when the pursuit of that success compromises the very foundation of character? We drove home in silence. The tension in the car was palpable, a physical barrier between us. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there for a long moment, staring at the closed garage door. "Why Leo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do it?" He didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched tight. When he finally spoke, his words were halting, choked with emotion. I couldn't fail Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Everyone expects so much. You expect so much. I didn't want to let you down." His words hit me like a physical blow. The pressure he felt, the crushing weight of expectation, was something I had inadvertently contributed to. I had praised his successes, but had I adequately emphasized the value of integrity, even in the face of failure? Parenting is an intricate dance of guidance and letting go. It is a profound responsibility, a constant recalibration of our own desires and our children's needs. We strive to instill values, honesty, fairness, emotional awareness, but these concepts are often overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of achievement. The story of Leo's cheating isn't just about a high school incident. It's a reflection of a broader cultural struggle. We are raising children in a society that often rewards the end result more than the process. We applaud the victory, but we seldom scrutinize the path taken to achieve it. In a traditional family structure, we often rely on established norms and expectations. We believe that if we follow the script, good grades, extracurricular activities, college, we are fulfilling our parental duties. But true guidance requires more than just checking boxes. It demands a deep, emotionally rich connection with our children. It demands that we teach them that failure is not a moral failing, but a crucial component of growth. It requires us to emphasize that honesty is not just a policy, but the very bedrock of a meaningful life. We must teach them that true success is not measured by the accolades they accumulate, but by the integrity with which they live. The weeks following the incident were difficult. Leo faced the consequences of his actions, a failing grade, detention, and a significant loss of trust. But more importantly, we faced the underlying issues together. We had long, uncomfortable conversations about pressure, expectation, and the true meaning of success. I had to confront my own complicity in the situation. I had to acknowledge that my desire for him to succeed had inadvertently communicated that achievement was more important than character. It was a painful realization, a stark reminder that our intentions, no matter how pure, can sometimes have unintended consequences. We often believe that our role as parents is to shield our children from the harsh realities of the world. We want to protect them from failure, from disappointment, from the consequences of their own mistakes. But true protection comes from equipping them with the emotional resilience and moral clarity to navigate those challenges themselves. We must teach them that fairness is not just about getting what they want, but about ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity. We must teach them that emotional awareness is not just about understanding their own feelings, but about recognizing the impact of their actions on others. These are not lessons that can be taught through lectures or reprimands. They are lessons that must be lived, demonstrated through our own actions and choices. We must model the integrity we expect from our children. We must be honest about our own failures and vulnerabilities. As I reflect on that Tuesday afternoon, I realize that the incident was not a failure of parenting, but an opportunity for profound growth. It was a catalyst for a deeper, more authentic connection with my son. It forced us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our own expectations and the cultural pressures that shape our lives. The journey of parenting is not a straight line to success. It is a messy, unpredictable, emotionally rich narrative filled with triumphs and setbacks, moments of profound connection, and periods of painful disconnect. It is a continuous process of learning, unlearning, and recalibrating. If you find yourself navigating the complex landscape of parenting, searching for guidance and connection, I encourage you to follow Emily Told Stories. It's a space where we can explore these intricate narratives together, finding solace and understanding in shared experiences. We often think we are raising our children, but in truth, they are raising us. They challenge our assumptions, expose our vulnerabilities, and force us to confront the deepest, most complex parts of ourselves. The true measure of our parenting is not found in the achievements of our children, but in the integrity, empathy, and resilience they carry with them into the world. And perhaps the most profound lesson is this: the goal is not to raise perfect children, but to raise individuals who have the courage to be flawed, the integrity to own their mistakes, and the resilience to learn from them. The true failure is not in making a mistake, but in refusing to let that mistake transform you.